Hey guys, how are you all? Welcome back to my channel. If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments. Alright, who can give me an example of a bloodline limit? More than half the hands in the class shot up to answer the question he had asked, and Kotetsu sighed. A bloodline that doesn't come from Konoha, he clarified. All of the hands that had previously been waving in the air dropped. Well, at least they knew the ones in their own village. That was miles better than last year's batch of fresh meat. Kotetsu hoped Azuma was doing better with the upper class. No doubt Hana's girls were trouncing both their classes. Seeing the terrified looks on the boys' faces, he began to sweat. Why did he sign up for this again? Oh yes, Azuma lost a bet with Shikaku. Really, who in their right mind challenged Inara to a game of shogi, and made a bet that they would actually win. Azuma was an idiot. He had told him not to move his king, and now they were stuck teaching. He wanted to go on missions, damn it. Don't worry, alright? He tried to reassure the group of 7-year-olds with a relaxed grin before continuing. It seemed to work on some of them, much to his relief. He really wasn't good with kids at the best of times. One example is the ice nature found in. He was interrupted by a brief knock at the door before Hana entered with the Hokage. He gawped for a moment before hurrying to the door and stepping outside with the two. Sasuke Uchiha, along with his entire class, strained his ears and leaned over his desk in an attempt to hear what was being said outside. They couldn't really see much thanks to the paneling of the door, but he could make out 3 large silhouettes and 1 smaller one. He knew who the larger ones belonged to, but not the smaller one. The small one cried something gleefully and jumped onto the silhouetted belonging to Hana, and then the Hokage. He was stunned that someone had the gall to do that. You didn't just run up and randomly hug the village leader. This guy was already an idiot in Sasuke's mind. A brave one, but still an idiot. Work hard, kiddo. I would have killed for this when I was in the academy. Kiba's sister was easily heard before she and the Hokage disappeared. There was a tense atmosphere when Kotetsu-sensei re-entered the room. It quickly turned to bafflement when they caught sight of his companion. Sasuke realized this was the small silhouette. She was a small girl, perhaps a bit younger than he was but not by much, and had shoulder-length, wild-looking blonde hair fastened in haphazard pigtails. He could just make out bright blue eyes and faint scratches on her cheeks. She wore a baggy black t-shirt, orange shorts, and black fingerless battle gloves with metal on them, like Itachi's did. Sasuke deemed this as odd. As far as he knew, girls were supposed to have tidy hair and wear skirts, not shorts. Alright, I know this is a bit unorthodox, but this is your new classmate, boys. Be nice, okay? Sasuke thought their instructor must be ill. What idiot would let a girl into the boys' class? There was no way she would keep up. The girls were given kunoichi classes for a reason. In his mind, the prospect of being nice was laughable, and he could tell that some of his classmates were having similar thoughts. Apparently the girl did too, for she snorted rather loudly. I don't care if they're nice or not, bandage face. As long as there's no damn flower arranging. She shuddered at the mere thought of such an activity, and Sasuke found his interest spiking. He'd been under the impression that the girls liked those weird classes. This one was odd. While he admitted interest, however, he still didn't like her. The only free seat was beside him, and there was no doubt that she would start to fawn all over him. As long as there's none of that stuff, I'll be perfectly fine. She finished scratching the inside of her ear with one finger. Sasuke stared at her, taken aback by the culture shock. Even Kiba, whose mother and sister were far from the usual female ninja, was surprised. He was beginning to revise his opinions on her at first impression. Maybe she wouldn't fawn over him after all, or was that too much to hope for? My name's Kotetsu attempted to correct her. Bandage face, she informed him stubbornly. Kotet, bandage face. Even Sasuke snorted with laughter. Kotetsu decided to give up. If she called Hana, dog lady, and the Hokage, old geezer, he sincerely doubted he was going to escape without some sort of new nickname. As I was saying, this is your new classmate. She's been skipped a grade, so do try to be a little bit less rambunctious with her. She's a year younger than you are. She didn't really mix well with the other girls, so she'll be joining us once a day instead of the girls. Bandage face, can I introduce myself, or are you going to do it for me? She interrupted. Kotetsu ignored the snickers and nodded sheepishly. She beamed at him, and then Sasuke, along the rest of the class, was given another shock. How could this girl be so, not girl-like, but still look like that. It defied all logic. I'm Naruto Uzumaki. I'm 6. Nice to meet, Cha. She grinned loudly. There was silence for a few moments before Kiba broke out into laughter. Fishcake? Your name's Fishcake? He choked out. A few of the other boys in the class snickered. They were the stupid ones. Sasuke had picked up on the slightly darker expression on her face and thought better of it. She glowered at Kiba and the boys who sat snickering with him. Before Kotetsu could stop her, she had jumped from bench to land directly in front of Kiba. Hana stopped walking momentarily and slapped her hand to her forehead. Shit, I forgot to warn him about the name thing. She yelled to herself. She considered going back for a few moments before tossing the idea aside. If they can't cope with Naruto, then the future male ninja of Konoha will be a source of eternal embarrassment. They can find out the hard way, she said to herself, ignoring the worried look the Hokage was giving her. Kiba meanwhile was about to be given some negative reinforcement for calling Naruto Fishcake. Naruto did not pause at all after jumping across several desks, and smashed her small fabric and metal-covered fist to Kiba's nose. The boy yelped in pain, uncaring of the tears that sprang to his eyes. That punch bloody hurt. There was a horrified silence throughout the classroom. Not even the faint buzzing of Shino's bugs could be heard. Shikamaru, who had been half interested, half asleep, was now fully awake. Never piss this girl off. She's almost as scary as Mom, he resolved, giving Kiba a pitying glance. Who the hell are you calling Fishcake, Fleabag? My name means Maelstrom, not Fishcake, Maelstrom, got it? Naruto roared the words directly into his ear, and Kiba nodded vigorously, trying to stem the blood that poured from his nose. Kotetsu gave him a pitying look and mouthed, "Nurse's office." Kiba wasted no time and hurried out of the room. Sasuke stared at Naruto as she smiled at Kotetsu and asked him where her seat was, not failing to use his new name. You can sit next to Sasuke, Naruto. Sasuke, put your hand up. Sasuke did as instructed, albeit somewhat warily. Despite his idiotic personality, Kiba was no pushover. He had just had his nose apparently broken by a girl a year younger than they were. Sasuke saw no harm in being a little cautious. He made a particularly noticeable mental note to never call her Fishcake even for a joke. It was too much of a health risk. The girl, still standing on Kiba's bench, looked over to him and hopped across the benches and plopped down into the seat beside him. She grinned at him before turning to ask Kotetsu if she could get a textbook till she could buy her own. This was too strange for Sasuke. Much as he hated it, he was used to girls doing their utmost to coax him into talking or even looking at them. Naruto did not do this, and refreshing as it was, Sasuke found this odd. In his later life, he would deem this the moment he fell for the girl. That was speaking in adult terms. In a future tense, however, at the moment, all Sasuke's 7-year-old mind could think of to explain this odd feeling was, this girl is wacko. Alright, back to bloodlines. I've given you one already, can anyone think of any others? Kotetsu asked hopefully. There was no need to regain order or discipline. As far as he was concerned, Naruto had been provoked by Kiba, and had probably given the class a desperately needed wake-up call. Whilst scaring the stuffing out of them, there was no answer for several minuets until Naruto gave a frustrated sigh and opened her mouth once more. Lava nature and the Rinnegan, though the Rinnegan is kinda iffy. It might not be real, Naruto stated. The boys stared at her. What? The old geezer has good books in his office. Sasuke saw his brother standing by the gates and hurried over to meet him. Itachi, you don't have work? He asked. It wasn't often his brother met him at school. Not that he needed to be picked upon a regular basis anymore, but even his father occasionally came by. For Itachi to meet him was a rare treat. I requested the week off so we can do a proper offering this year, he explained. Sasuke nodded in understanding. Every year they would make an offering with their father to their mother. Sasuke didn't remember her much. He'd only been 1 year old when she died, but he remembered to be a kind, loving person. He had been so distracted by the event in class that day that he had, momentarily, completely forgotten about it. As they walked through the streets back to the compound, the conversation discussed his day at the academy and inevitably turned to Naruto. There's a weird girl in the boys' class now, so I completely forgot. She's wacko. She broke Kiba's nose because he called her Fishcake. She called Kotetsu, bandage face, and the Hokage, old geezer, he informed his brother. He was doing all he could to stress how not girl-like, and therefore, wacko, she was. Itachi raised an eyebrow a fraction, which indicated his surprise to Sasuke. "You aren't talking about Naruto Uzumaki, are you?" he asked. Sasuke's eyes widened. "You know her? How?" He pushed aside the garden gate. Itachi took the gate from him and passed through himself, closing it behind him before joining Sasuke on the walk up to their front door. "Father sponsors her," he answered. Sasuke felt confused. "Sponsor?" Konoha doesn't have a lot of orphans, about 100 in the whole village, so they are all sent into ninja schooling. High-ranking ninjas sponsor them until they earn Chunin rank or turn 18, whichever comes first. Father sponsors Naruto, though I've only met her a few times. It was when you were younger, so you probably don't remember her, he clarified. Sasuke gawped at him. He was so shocked he almost forgot to take off his shoes before entering the house. "Father did that?" he asked in complete surprise. Had Itachi not been the one who told him, he would never have believed such a thing possible. He sat down at the table at Itachi's order. His older brother started to trundle awkwardly about the kitchen, intent on making them a sandwich. Despite his skills as a ninja, his skills as a chef were very limited. "You are completely shocked," Itachi noted, smiling. But father isn't. I mean, he couldn't find the appropriate words to explain his thoughts. "Why would he do that?" he asked. It was as close as he could get to what he really wanted to say. Itachi gave a soft laugh as he laid a tomato sandwich in front of his younger sibling and helping himself to leftover rice balls. "I was surprised when I first found out too, but he seems to genuinely worry about her as much as you or me, odd as it seems." Itachi took a bite from one of the rice balls. Sasuke cleared his own mouth before asking another question. Why? Why did he sponsor her anyway? He was still finding it difficult to understand his father's actions. There was a pause before Itachi answered in a voice that told Sasuke he understood their father as much as he did. "I have absolutely no idea, Sasuke. None at all." After this new information was revealed, Sasuke changed his opinion of Naruto from wacko to really wacko. "You're so lucky, Naruto. You get to join the boys' class." Ino wailed as they walked back from the academy. Ino had also been skipped ahead, but much to her discontent she was stuck in the girls' class with the flower arranging. Not that she minded this, but Naruto got to see Sasuke as much as she wanted. Not to mention the boys' class just got extra training. She did flower arranging every day in the shop. She'd rather be in the boys' class. In fact, she had the same opinions her friend held. It was not that Naruto was bad at flower arranging, she grew up helping Ino in her family's shop, so it was impossible for her to be terrible. It was just she was considerably more boisterous than the other girls, and hated the class with a passion. After turning a gorse bush into a few throwing stars and using her flower arrangements for target practice, Hana had finally decided the girls' additional education was not for Naruto. "I know, but I thought the boys would be smarter since they get extra training, but Kiba can be really stupid sometimes. Even Sasuke isn't all that smart, and he's supposed to be the top of our class. They have no common sense." Naruto kicked a stone in irritation. It had been a week since she moved into the second-year class with Ino, and they boys' apparent idiocy despite the extra help baffled her. "What? Really? That's impossible," Ino asked, clearly shocked to her core. His solution to a hostage situation was killing the hostage-taker Ino. "That's it. No danger analysis or nothing." "What? Are you sure?" Ino asked, faltering slightly. "You know I sit next to him, Ino." It was impossible not to hear him. Ino could not think of anything to say to this and decided it would be better for her pride to drop the subject. Naruto was very stubborn and refused to loosen an argument. She was very much the same, and if they started arguing there would be no end to it due to stubbornness. Instead, she turned the conversation to Naruto's mother. "Do you want me to come with you to visit your mom? I don't have work today." Actually, she had specifically begged her father on hands and knees, time off for this exact purpose. Naruto sometimes got depressed when she visited her mother, and needed someone to cheer her up afterwards. Besides, you shouldn't visit graveyards by yourself. Naruto looked shocked for a moment before breaking into an even wider smile. "Really? That'd be awesome." She squealed a very un-Naruto-like squeal. It showed just how grateful she was for the offer. Naruto would only squeal when she was ecstatically happy. The walk to the cemetery was not a long one. They spoke to kind old priest and he guided them to the gravesite of Kushina Uzumaki. The graveyard was huge, and they always got lost trying to find the grave. Ino actually knew the route fairly well by now, but the priest was one of a small number that was nice to Naruto and she knew her friend enjoyed talking with him. Naruto loved her friends, but she was a social creature, and loved talking with other people too. For some reason though, everyone seemed to glare at her, making it near impossible. Ino wasn't about to deny her a rare snitch of conversation from someone she didn't see on a regular basis. Naruto lit the incense and laid down her offering, miso ramen, before clapping her hands together and closing her eyes in prayer, Ino copying her actions. Naruto was in the midst of telling her mother about how much of an idiot Kiba was when she heard a familiar voice. "Naruto? Is that you?" She looked up from her prayer and saw Mr. Perma-Frown standing some distance away with Sasuke and some other guy who looked familiar but she couldn't quite remember. "Perma-Frown? What are you doing here? And why is Duck Butthead with you? You know him?" she asked, running up to the man. She had only met him a few times, and she could barely remember most of them. She just knew this was the guy who took care of her bills and stuff till she could do it herself. Ino trotted over curiously. She recognized Naruto's nickname for her benefactor and was curious to see what he was like. Sure, Sasuke was there, but if what Naruto said was true, she was probably being a bit overzealous with her admiration. Either way, Naruto was more important than Sasuke any day. "Visiting my wife," he stated plainly. Ino gave him a deadpan stare. No wonder Naruto called him Perma-Frown. Was his face glued like that or something? Had he smiled? Like, ever? "I've never seen you here before. Who are you visiting?" he asked curiously. Ino glanced at the two boys standing with him, eavesdropping with apparent eagerness. She recognized Sasuke without a second thought, but not the other one. They looked kind of the same. He caught her staring and she blushed, and turned back to Naruto. "My mom, she's over there." Naruto pointed to the grave. Fugaku gave a nod of understanding, or approval, Ino wasn't quite sure which. "Why is there ramen on it?" Sasuke asked bluntly. Itachi smacked him on the back of the head. "That's my offering. She says ramen reminded her of my dad. I don't know who he is, but I always give her ramen when I visit." Naruto seemed to be completely unaffected by Sasuke's bluntness. But it's ramen. You can't give people ramen as an offering." Naruto's face faltered slightly. Fugaku was about to reprimand him, but Ino got there first. She punched his head where Itachi had previously slapped him. "Who says it isn't? The priest said it was all right, so who says Naruto can't use ramen, Duck Butthead?" she yelled, Naruto's nickname for him slipping out. Sasuke stared at her in shock, though that was to be expected as Ino had been a member of his fan club not 2 hours ago. Itachi seemed to be amused. He had a small smirk on his face. Ino caught this and glared at him before sticking her tongue out and pulling down one of her eyelids. He snickered at the action, drawing a raised eyebrow from Fugaku. "I didn't mean it, well." Sasuke fumbled as he searched for the meaning he was trying to explain, face red with embarrassment. After some time, he looked to his father, eyes pleading for help. "I think what Sasuke is trying to say is that he didn't mean to offend you. He just considered ramen to be an unusual choice for an offering," Fugaku clarified. Sasuke nodded vehemently. Naruto looked at Ino. She was busy trying to poke the older boy's arm in an apparently sensitive spot. He seemed to be amused by her efforts. Seeing she had a chance to talk to Mr. Perma-Frown without her bodyguard, she asked a question yet to be answered again. "Perma-Frown, how do you know Duck Butthead?" Perma-Frown looked as surprised as he could look in her experience. "Sasuke? He's my son." Naruto's jaw dropped open. "That's his brother, Itachi." He nodded towards Itachi, who was preventing Ino from hitting him by placing a hand to her forehead. Seeing a good opportunity for Sasuke to get to know his ward, he decided to be sneaky. "I have to go speak with the priest. Do you mind if Sasuke and Itachi stay here?" he asked. Naruto, mouth still agape, shook her head. He thanked her and briskly walked away towards the priest's hut. Naruto and Sasuke were left with an awkward atmosphere, only broken by Ino's frustrated yells and an occasional chuckle from Itachi. "You're visiting your mom too?" Sasuke asked, genuinely curious. Naruto nodded. She seemed distracted for a while before she brightened up. She grabbed his arm and dragged him back towards the grave. "You can say hi. Just me, Ino and the old geezer visiting is boring, she proclaimed loudly. Sasuke stared at her. But I don't know her, I don't even know what she looks like, he objected. Naruto snorted. PFT. So, who cares? Mom won't, she said, shoving a stick of incense into his hand. Sasuke decided it would be easier to just do as instructed. He lit the stick of incense and placed it in the holder and clapped his hands together. Before closing his eyes, however, he turned to Naruto. At least tell me what she looks like, it's weird praying for someone I never met. Naruto raised an eyebrow as she clapped her own hands together again, and surprisingly, a frown decorated her face. I don't really know. Sasuke was stunned by her confession. His mother had died when he was 1 year old, but he could remember a few things. Feelings mostly, but he had a few concrete images of her face stored away. The smell of her hair was a particularly strong image for some reason. The old geezer says she had red hair, and hated girly stuff like me, but when I think of her, I get the feeling she didn't have red hair. I think it was brown or something else really dark, Naruto commented. She closed her eyes, presumably in concentration, and made a disgruntled face before opening them once again. She rubbed a hand to her forehead and trundled back to her prayers instead. I just think of Mum and leave it at that, or my head gets all weird and I get a headache from thinking about it all so much. Sasuke noticed the less cheery tone of voice. It didn't sound right on her for some reason. She should be cheery, he decided, and made moves to distract her from the headache-inducing thoughts. Idiot, it's because your brain is slow. Is not duck butt head. Idiot. When Fugaku returned from his supposed visit with the priest, he allowed himself a small smile at the sight that greeted him. Naruto had somehow dragged Sasuke into prayers for Kushina. Even Itachi seemed to have lightened up for once. The boy was too much like him for his own good sometimes, and was involved in a game of Jan-Ken with the blonde girl. He was certain she was one of Inochi's twins. With that ponytail and those eyes, she looked very Yamanaka-like. Itachi caught his momentary show of emotion and his mouth parted slightly, the Itachi equivalent of jaw-dropping, before narrowing his eyes. Fugaku sighed. It was just like Itachi to realize there was more to Naruto to meet the eye. Unfortunately for Itachi, that information would never be known to him unless he became clan head all of a sudden. Fugaku would take Naruto's history to his grave, and he had no plans to die in the near future. Itachi would only find out after his death, and only then. As for Sasuke, it would be better if he never knew at all, but Fugaku was not naive. Keeping secrets was hard in a ninja village, and the bigger the secret the easier it was to expose. Ah, Perma frowns back, Naruto yelled, pointing to Fugaku. He walked over to the small group, easily avoiding Itachi's suspicious gaze. It's been good to see you, Naruto, but I'm afraid we must be going. These two eat more than you would expect, he informed her, face carefully blank. Naruto pouted, but nodded. Try to eat something other than ramen. You'll never get taller if you don't eat right. Naruto avoided his gaze pointedly, very interested in one of the flowers left behind on a nearby grave. Sasuke snickered and Naruto glared at him before stamping on his foot. Don't laugh at ramen. Ramen is awesome. Tomatoes are way better, Sasuke huffed, leaning to the side to keep the weight of his now injured foot. Naruto's eyes widened in surprise. You like tomatoes too? Sasuke nodded. He did not show it, but he was just as pleased with the revelation. Salt or sugar? She asked. Sugar, Sasuke replied, equally surprised. Naruto frowned. Nah, salt is way better, duck butthead. Sugar, salt. A warning look from Fugaku stopped the fight before it got too far out of hand. Ino snickered and Itachi smirked. Ino punched him in the stomach for laughing at her friend, ignoring her own laughter at Sasuke. Then, till we meet again, Naruto, Fugaku nodded his head slightly. There was a small pause on his part before he turned towards the grave and did the same. Itachi's eyes narrowed slightly and Sasuke's widened. Bye, Perma frowned. Man lady. See you tomorrow, duck butthead. Naruto yelled, waving as they walked away. Itachi spluttered at the nickname he had been given in time with hysterical laughter from Ino and Sasuke. Come on, Naruto, let's go get something to eat from Choji's place. Ino pulled at her friend's arm. I'm hungry. Naruto smiled and let herself be dragged out of the cemetery, waving goodbye to the priest as they went. After that day, Naruto and Sasuke considered themselves as slightly more than just passing acquaintances. 3 years later, and Naruto had progressed through the academy well. She was now 9 years old, and had developed close friendships with several of her classmates, though she was closer to Ino and Sasuke than she was the others. They knew her best. She was in her second to last year of classes, Azumo's bandana head class. She still wore her unflattering baggy black t-shirt and orange shorts. She still attended the boys' extra theory and workout classes instead of the stupid class the other girls were forced to attend. Poor unfortunate souls. A collective groan ran throughout the classroom as Plaster Face handed out the test sheets. Ino was going completely loopy since it was a pop test, and she hadn't done any form of studying for the past week. She was bullying Shikamaru into giving her a brief rundown on what they had covered during the last month or so. Naruto hoped that she would do as well as she had the last 2 times. She'd come second twice in a row. It was unbelievably good luck, and she hoped this string of good luck would continue. Despite this, she was slightly worried. She barely read over her books, preferring to practice with her physical arts or weapons. After all, they were far more useful in dispatching an enemy than knowing who proposed what in the Foreign Amnesty Treaty. But she still remembered what she saw in those books word for word. At first she passed it off as just understanding what they were talking about for once, but after reading them again, she found that was not the case. These books made no sense. She barely understood what half of these treaties were for, but she found herself pouring the answers out when asked vocally or otherwise. Even more disturbing, after seeing a fight breaking out at Ichiraku's earlier that day, she just had to think about it and it popped into her head with fearsome clarity. That was not something she wanted to remember, but she did. All this led her to believe this was something weird. Naruto hated weird. Despite this, she still wanted to do her best in the test. She would not lose out to all those other sorry excuses for female ninja who stalked Duck Butthead all day, gushing about Glasses Lady's adorable flower arrangements. Bleared. No way was she going to lose out to them. Thank God Ino wasn't one of them. She would have had to punch her some sense into her head, and she didn't really want to punch Ino. She'd get mad, and Ino was kind of scary when she was mad. She picked up her pencil and stared at the first question on the paper, determination in her eyes. Minato Namikaze, before election as 4th Hokage, was offered 2 different positions of importance in the Leaf government system. State these positions and give 2 reasons for each of your answers. You must include dates and full names and ranks of any other ninja mentioned in your answer. The answers were already there by the time she finished reading the question. She didn't feel too guilty either, since the reign of the 4th Hokage was one of the few subjects in the class on Konoha history she enjoyed, and thus, fully understood. Strange memory alterations aside for the time being, she put the pencil to paper and scribbled furiously. Again? Sasuke stared at the list of student rankings that had just been posted on the class notice board. Once again, Naruto had somehow managed to gain almost the same marks as him. She was 1 mark off of a tie for first place. This was the 3rd time already. Since when did Naruto get so smart? He knew she was smarter than most of the boys in the class, especially in the extra lessons she had joined instead of the girls' classes, but in almost tying for first place 3 times in a row. That was just weird. Naruto wasn't that smart. Move out of the way, Duck Butthead. You're blocking the view. Naruto pushed him aside roughly so as to gain a better look at the results. This, coupled with her ever so complimentary nickname, gained her a large number of glares from many of the other girls. Naruto didn't even notice. Sasuke twitched. How could she not notice all those glares? You did it again? What super study method are you using? Tell me. I'll never get his attention if I'm not smart. Ino was just as shocked as he was, but the frustration in her voice was directed somewhere else entirely. Sasuke pitied the poor soul she'd set her eyes on since she had decided he was no longer worthy of her attention. I just read what Dolphin and Bandage Face tells us to. I dunno how I'm remembering all of it, let alone how I keep getting the same marks as Duck Butthead. I keep telling you, Ino. And why are you complaining? You got 2nd place. Ino frowned, and Sasuke watched them traipse to the back of the room and plonk down in their usual seats. Maybe you have some freaky bloodline that lets you remember stuff. Ino seemed determined to come up with an explanation for this strange behavior, much to Sasuke's interest, but all Naruto did was give Ino an exasperated look. Ino, My mom didn't have a bloodline. You already know that. Yeah, but what about your dad? I don't know who he is. Mom never said. Exactly. He might have had one. That's impossible, Eno. The old geezer would tell me if I had a bloodline. Eno huffed but could think of no reply to that. She looked like she was about to say something else, but they were interrupted by Iruka announcing the start of the class. More interested in the technicalities of assassination, Sasuke paid no heed to the conversation and it was soon forgotten. The rain poured, but Naruto could care less about the liquid that rendered her clothes little more than sodden fabric. She sat on the protective barrier of Konoha Bridge, watching as thunder crashed and lightning sparked throughout the sky, the warm feeling of summer rain penetrating through to her skin. The humidity that had caused the storm was barely noticeable to her, for she had other concerns. This sudden memory improvement, for example. She watched as lightning blazed, setting the sky aflame with white light, but this was not unnerved her so much about this storm. What had the blonde girl so on edge was that she could remember every pattern painted by the electricity that the atmosphere had discharged on Konoha. She wasn't even trying to remember it. All she had to do was think, and bang. There it was, clearly envisioned in her mind. Every detail. She could even remember the shadows the building created by the glow created by the storm. Thunder roared throughout the area and Naruto gripped the wood of the barrier with her soaked hands. Her legs that had previously been dangling over the edge of the railing were pulled up to her chest and she buried her face in her knees. She couldn't actually remember the sound, but it was like a red flag popped up every so often when she visualized the storm. A red flag with, "Here there be thunder," printed on it in unmistakable bold print. This scared her more than she cared to admit. Ino passed it off as a genetic trait, but Naruto was nowhere near as confident with her theory. What kind of genetic inheritance could account for this level of memory? Had her mother still been alive, she would have asked her and been given a very clear, sensible answer, whether it was one she wanted to hear or not. But her mother was not here, and she had very few adults she could turn to for support. The villagers avoided her as much as possible, unless they were trying to yell at her for her pranks, and the adults she had questioned about her sudden increase in recollective ability were as baffled as she. The old geezer had passed it of a photographic memory, seeming very convinced with his own answer. Naruto didn't like that answer though. Wasn't a photographic memory something that was present from birth, like Shikamaru? Most of the Naras were born with photographic memories. They could remember pretty much everything from their moment of birth. Shouldn't she be able to do the same thing if that were the case? The logical answer would be yes, but she did not, no matter how many headaches she gave herself in trying. It was only for the last few months that this ability had emerged and that told her this was not a photographic memory like the old geezer suggested. That scared her. She released one of her white-knuckled fists from the barrier and hugged her knees closer. She did not cry. Crying did not solve anything. Never had, never will, but she was genuinely afraid of herself. And that made the strange all the worse. It was not that the ability was unwelcome, it was very beneficial, but it was mysterious, unknown, not something that she had accounted for. Naruto was always sure of herself, and avoided the unknown for fear of becoming unsure and her resolve weakening. This came from the villagers' hatred for her. She didn't know why they hated her, but she was afraid of the reason, whatever it was. Yet she hated not knowing what it was. She had a clear resolve to always be in control of her own actions from this. The sudden cognitive upgrade was uncontrollable. Thus, it was to be feared. What the hell are you doing out here, you idiot? Naruto swirled her head to one of the streets on the side of the river, raging currents swirling from the tempest that hung over the village. Her wet hair clung to her neck, face and shoulders, and she pushed it aside to clearer see the one who called out to her. Are you crazy? What the hell were you thinking coming out in a storm like this? Sasuke had to fight to be heard above the raging winds. Tentatively bracing the storm, he hurried towards her seat on the bridge. He wore a long ninja cloak, but it did little to protect him from the storm. It was already completely soaked through. He grabbed her arm and pulled her from her seat, hurrying to the shelter of a closed shop entrance. She stared up at him, he being slightly taller than she was. He gave her a look of wide-eyed horror as he took in her dripping appearance, fervently removing his own soaked cloak and draping it around her shoulders. Naruto stared at him, a perplexed look on her face as he did so. What on earth were you thinking going out in a storm like this? He yelled, trying to make his voice be heard above the snapping thunder and howls of the wind. I just felt like going for a walk, she informed him, completely unconcerned. His eyes bulged in their sockets for a brief moment before he clapped her on the back of the head with his hand. Naruto winced as the blow added to the already irritating headache she had developed. She'd been having a lot recently, and they seemed to be getting worse. Are you crazy? You could catch pneumonia out here. Never mind the lightning just outside the village wall that could frazzle you. Sasuke whacked the back of her head once again for good measure. Naruto gave him an exasperated look. You know I don't get sick, duck butthead. She grumbled truthfully. In all her years, she had never once caught so much as a measly sniffle. Any physical injuries quickly healed too. It was another oddity that completely baffled her. Then again, these headaches were making her wonder if she really was as healthy as she had previously thought. Sasuke, displeased her casual attitude to her health, refused to remove the irritated look from his face. Just because you don't get sick doesn't mean you can't be electrocuted, you idiot. He whacked her on the head again. Ouch. Stop doing that, duck butthead. I do feel pain, you know, she grumbled. They bickered in the shelter of the shop entrance, faces illuminated by the flashes of angry light, voices barely audible over the sound of the wind. What are you doing out here if it's so dangerous? Naruto asked. She was genuinely confused. Here he was lecturing her about going out in a storm when he was doing the same thing. I'm looking for you, dimwit, he retorted. What? Why? Sasuke sighed. Ino's dad called mine after Ino went looking for you earlier. She's going nuts, by the way. She thinks you've been caught in a tornado and dumped in the middle of wind country. Sasuke let this information be absorbed. The girl began grumbling to herself about stupid overprotective pigs, and Sasuke fought down the urge to laugh at her grumpy, exasperated expression. Dad sent me out to look for you since he's kind of gone paranoid too, thanks to Ino. He's turning the village upside down. It's quite scary actually. Sasuke shuddered at the memory. Worry was not an expression he was used to seeing on his father's face. It just seemed wrong somehow. Perma-frown? Are you sure? She asked in disbelief. Sasuke nodded. Oops. Sasuke's eyebrow twitched. She had the head of the Uchiha clan turning the village upside down looking for her due to her imbecilic nature, and all she could say was, oops. He dashed these thoughts from his head. They could be attended to later. Right now, his priority to get the stupid girl back indoors. Come on, I'm supposed to take you home if I find you. Not waiting for a reply, he took her hand and led her out of their temporary shelter. Naruto protested loudly but found herself being dragged towards the Uchiha compound all the same. Sasuke deemed this as payback for matching his test scores for the third time in a row. Naruto forced a weak smile on her face at the sight of Fugaku Uchiha. She stood in his walkway, dripping water onto the floor from her outdoor excursion, rubbing her head sheepishly. He gave her a look that suggested a lot of misfortune on her part if she did not come up with a suitable explanation very quickly. Nice weather we're having, she smiled weakly. Fugaku continued to frown at her. Hidden around the corner, Sasuke couldn't help but feel pity for the girl. His dad was freaking shit scary when he was mad. He didn't feel enough pity to try and reassure her though. Just because he pitied her at the moment didn't make him stupid. His dad was seriously not happy. And why, pray tell, did you deem it wise to go out in a thunderstorm such as this? Fugaku asked in an eerily calm voice. Naruto trembled at the sight of the intimidating figure towering over her. When would she finally hit a growth spurt? His enraged eyes were calm, and that made them all the more terrifying for the young girl. Tears welled up in her eyes, and for the first time since he had met the girl 3 years ago, Sasuke witnessed Naruto Uzumaki cry. I'm sorry. Naruto sobbed, hugging her minder around the waist. It was as far as she could reach, much to Fugaku's astonishment. After recovering from the shock, Fugaku sighed and crouched down to her eye level. Sasuke almost had a heart attack, thinking he was about to actually hug the girl. However, it was a false alarm. Fugaku bopped the girl on the head lightly. Apparently it was a reprimand since Naruto yelped at the impact. You idiot girl! What on earth possessed you to go out in this? Fugaku gestured towards a window as a thunderclap echoed loudly through the village. Naruto mumbled something too quiet for Sasuke to hear clearly. The only words he caught were, photographic, don't want to, old geezer, piggy, and freaking weird. This was less than helpful. He could not for the life of him think of how these 5 words could form a cohesive sentence. He did however catch his father's eyes widen for 1 nanosecond with, unless he was sorely mistaken, panic. The expression vanished as quickly as it appeared and Sasuke found himself wondering if he was mistaken. Had the discomforting tone not been present in his father's voice, he would have believed he was. "You're sure?" he asked. Naruto nodded and Sasuke couldn't help but be puzzled by the frown on his father's face. What on earth was he so worried about? Suddenly this didn't seem to be about the weather anymore. I see. Sasuke wished Itachi was home to shed some light on all this. He would have an idea of what was going on. Unfortunately, Itachi had his own mission and wouldn't be back till later that night. Sasuke was left to contemplate these thoughts by himself. After giving the idiot some clean clothes, Sasuke didn't know why his father had girls' clothing in his cupboard, and deemed it prudent not to ask, and bribing her into taking a shower with the promise of ramen. Sasuke found himself accompanying the girl through the now calm streets of Konoha. The girl had been adamant that she was perfectly capable of walking home herself, and was none the worse for wear, but Fugaku had other ideas. He did not trust the villagers at all, despite T3rd Hokage's law, and would have none of it. After Sasuke butted in claiming girls shouldn't walk around so late alone, she had no choice but to give in. However, this was not before punching Sasuke for implying women couldn't look after themselves. As they walked past the ramen stand, Sasuke couldn't help but wonder what had her so wound up. Even after talking with his father, he was still having a hard time visualizing Fugaku Uchiha as an agony aunt. She still looked worried about something. She reacted to the smallest of movements. She nearly impaled a poor bow-adorned cat with a kunai when it knocked over some rubbish bins. His musings triggered the memory of her conversation with Ino earlier in the day. Was that why she was so on edge? But that didn't make sense. If she was having an easier time remembering things, surely it just meant she was getting smarter. Well, sort of. Shouldn't it be a good thing? Never one to leave curiosity unsatisfied when he could avoid it, he deemed he would get more answers from the blonde girl herself. "Why are you freaking about remembering stuff so much?" he asked, not wanting to beat around the bush. Naruto stared at him for a few moments, clearly surprised he knew what she had been stressing over. "It's weird. I'm not even trying to remember things, but I remember them anyway," she grumbled, refusing to meet his gaze. He frowned in confusion. "But isn't it a good thing? You place second in class now." "That's just it, Sasuke," she yelled in frustration, pulling on her pigtails with much the same emotion. Sasuke startled a bit at the action. Was the hair pulling necessary? What if she pulled it out? Weren't girls supposed to obsess over their hair? Wait, this was Naruto. She was a girl in genetic makeup only. I don't even understand any of it. I just know the answers for the questions Dolphin and Bandage Face give us, even if I don't want to. And I can't forget anything. It's like it's permanently branded into my skull. I'm weird enough already, I don't need this on top of everything else. She all but yelled, still pulling on the pigtails. If Sasuke didn't know better, he'd say she was prematurely developing the Sharingan. He remembered Itachi being on the verge of gouging his eyes out when he went through the process. Sometimes it developed on its own, instead of during a traumatic experience like it usually did. That was what happened with Itachi, and if he remembered rightly, he'd been a bit freaked out with the perfect memory thing till their father had sat him down and explained it. He'd been given the same explanation himself, though he had yet to actually activate his family's bloodline. He remembered being on the verge of gouging his eyes out when he went through the process, but only after walking in on his father in the shower, something that had scarred him for life. But Sasuke did know better. If Naruto was developing the bloodline, she wouldn't be an Uzumaki. If anyone married into the clan, they took the family name. And if not married, any children produced by a couple would receive the Uchiha name. It was a law of the village for certain bloodlines. Whoever her father had been, it wasn't an Uchiha or she'd be in the clan. He'd seen her mother's grave and she was an Uzumaki, so Naruto developing the Sharingan was impossible. After trying to think of some other explanation, he couldn't blame her for freaking out. If it was him, he'd be losing it a bit himself. After listening to her explanation of how the process worked, he debated asking if she wasn't distantly related to his own clan. Some of the side effects could be found in very distant relatives. The way she was alerted when there had been a sound, for example, was similar to how Itachi had explained the breakdown and memorization of ninja techniques with the Sharingan. This was much more than an average photographic memory. Considering her lack of people to confide in, she had all the reason in the world to have some sort of breakdown. Or as she was currently doing, waving her arms, pulling her pigtails, yelling and trying to vent in general. Maybe you should just go with it, he suggested, breaking her out of another rant of some unwanted memory. Something about a drunken man trying to dance at Ichiraku's. She gave him a, "Are you on some sort of medication that makes your head funny? Look. It's not really doing you any harm, is it? You don't have to worry about studying as much, you just need to get to the point where you understand what you're remembering. If something goes wrong and you go into a coma or something, then you can worry. It might no be permanent, so you should take advantage of it while you can." They had, by now, arrived outside the small apartment where Naruto lived. Sasuke didn't know why she lived on her own. His father had offered her a place in the compound more than once, but she was stubborn. He suspected it had to do with the sentimental value of the place. From what he knew, the apartment had been her father. She didn't know his name, never mind having seen a picture. She had plenty of her mother, but she had nothing of her father but this old apartment. She stared stunned by his speech for a few moments. "Oh my God, you can talk after all," she gawped. He frowned at her and she broke into gales of laughter. He waited for her to finish irritably. After clamming down, she focused on the arduous process of opening her door. The hinges were dodgy, and the door itself was a bit of a tight fit in the frame. After vanquishing the fearsome door, she gave him another long stare. He was about to ask her what she was staring at when, quick as a flash, he felt a pair of soft lips on his cheek, followed by the sound of the door slamming and an embarrassed cry of, "Thanks, Sasuke." Sasuke stood staring at the door that had been slammed in his face, slightly confused as to what had just occurred. He replayed the whole scenario in his head, before flushing a bright cherry color. She kissed me. The least girl-like girl in existence. I didn't think she even knew how. Sasuke idly noted the kiss didn't really bother him as much as it normally would have. Sakura had tried to do the same thing once, and Naruto and Ino had to hold him back before he actually hit her. That was just for the mere attempt. Why wasn't this bothering him? It didn't make any sense at all. Upon arriving back at his own house, he had slumped on the sofa, staring into nothingness as he tried to come to some sort of logical reason as to why Naruto's show of affection did not make him want to kill something with lots of kunai. He'd even caught the attentions of his father with his strange actions. "Did something happen I should be worried about?" he asked. Sasuke knew this was about as close to concern as his father would let show. Was he really acting that odd? Was that why Naruto kissed him? Was she trying to cheer him up? No, she knew that would have been the last thing that would have cheered him up. So why wasn't he mad at her? "Sasuke, did you hear me?" Sasuke jerked back to reality at the sound of his father's voice. "Huh? Did you not hear my question?" "What? No, why?" "I asked if something happened I should be worried about," his father repeated the question. "When?" Sasuke asked, still a bit confused. Why was his father so talkative all of a sudden? He was only this talkative with Naruto. On the way to Naruto's apartment, his father clarified. Sasuke suddenly remembered the feel of Naruto's lips on his cheek. "You have been acting like a creature of non-intelligence since you came home, though it's strange." Sasuke could feel the blood rushing to his cheeks. Why was he remembering that now? He couldn't let his father see him blushing like a girl. No, nothing at all, he objected hastily. Sensing his mistake, he clammed down as much as possible and made an excuse about needing sleep, before walking from the room as quickly as possible. He closed the door behind him and flopped down onto the bed, not without stubbing his toe on something in the darkness first. "Arg, I don't get it, what the hell did she have to go and do that for? Stupid blonde." He yelled into the unusually less plump pillow, beating it once with his fists. It felt good to vent frustration, so he thumped the pillow some more. "Stupid. Thump. Blonde. Thump. Stupid. Thump. Naruto. Sasuke, what are you doing to my pillow? More to the point, why are you in my room?" Sasuke yelped, rolling off the bed to avoid any possible kunai hurling. As he rolled off the bed, his head made contact with something hard and made of wood that wasn't supposed to be next to his bed. He hissed in pain, feeling something trickling down his head past his nose. He tried standing up, but saw stars and decided standing wasn't a good idea. His head really hurt, and there was something sticky in his hair that smelled weird. What was he doing again? There was a rustle of clothing and the lights flicked on. Sasuke, you're bleeding. You need to get father to check you over, Itachi said, pulling him to his feet. What are you doing here? Sasuke asked, gripping his brother's arm. His head felt very fuzzy and hurt. Why was Itachi here? He took a tentative step forward. He felt woozy. Sasuke, this is my room. What? It can't be. Sasuke looked around carefully, trying to avoid the dizziness. No wonder he hit his head. Itachi had that cabinet by his bed. His was on the other side. Wait, why was in Itachi's room? That made no sense. He was supposed to be in his room, not Itachi's. Why am I in your room? Sasuke asked, vaguely aware of being direct towards the sitting room once again. How should I know? Sit down while I go find father. Sasuke sat on the sofa obediently, trying to figure out why he had been in Itachi's room. Had he been so frazzled that he'd walked into Itachi's room instead of his own? Apparently, but why was he so frazzled anyway? Footsteps told him Itachi had returned with their father. Fugaku gave him an exasperated look. First Naruto decides to go out in the worst thunderstorm in 11 years. Now you decide to bash your skull open? Itachi raised an eyebrow and Fugaku waved his hand in an "I'll tell you later" gesture. He sat down on the sofa beside him and his hand glowed green with one of his old medical techniques. He led his hand to the wound and frowned. If you'd hit your head any harder, you'd have a cracked skull. What on earth were you doing? He asked wearily. I was startled. I rolled off the bed in case someone was attacking and hit my head on Itachi's cabinet. Sasuke replied as his father knit the skin on his head back together with chakra. Why were you in my room? Sasuke didn't answer. He had no plausible excuse, and he sure as hell wasn't going to tell them the truth. He'd never live it down if they found out. Fugaku glared at him, having finished healing his head, and Sasuke fidgeted awkwardly. Sasuke, Fugaku warned. Sasuke decided he could just explain without actually mentioning anything too embarrassing. He just had to be careful with his wording. I was thinking about something, so I wasn't really concentrating. Itachi popped up out of nowhere and he left it hanging. Itachi shook his head, clearly trying to hide his amusement. Fugaku gave his son an analytical gaze before grumbling something to himself. What did she do now? He asked, actual resignation appearing in his face. Sasuke gave him a look of confusion. Naruto, what did she do? I know this is her fault. That girl causes problems without even being in the room. You've been acting strange since you came home. It's only logical this is her fault somehow. What did she do? He asked, in a tone that seemed to beg nothing that had caused destruction. Sasuke's flushed face was enough to answer his question. Oh shit? Fugaku rubbed his temples before glaring at Itachi. Why didn't you go through this? This would be so much easier if you had. I'd have previous experience for reference. What? I don't understand. What are you talking about, father? Itachi asked, genuinely stumped. Fugaku gave him a look of exasperation before gesturing to Sasuke with one hand. Girls. Puberty. You never did that. You just grew. He glanced his eldest up and down Tudang. With you I just had to point out the facts and leave it at that. If you weren't so all I wouldn't be having this problem. He glanced towards his youngest. I'm not all. I'm just picky. Itachi said defensively. What do girls have to with puber what's it? Sasuke asked. Great, now I have to give him the talk. Fugaku grumbled, stomping down the hall to his office, still grumbling. Bad enough with Itachi. I could bribe Iruka, but that means Naruto will be sent back to the girls' class for a while. If this gets out she'll be hell on earth. Itachi ignored his father, still offended by the all remark. Sasuke was still relatively confused. The talk? What talk? Naruto refused to answer Ino's questions as they entered the classroom. Ino twitched, but catching sight of that teacher from the upper year classes, she decided against saying something. He had a worse temper than she or Naruto did, it wasn't worth the risk. She vowed to find out what was bothering her fellow blonde by the end of the day, however. They took their seats, Ino seated between Shikamaru and Choji. As Naruto slid in next to Sasuke, Ino noticed the blonde's light blush. She took a look at Sasuke to find him flaming like a tomato. She had missed something. She knew she had. Sasuke had been acting out of it all week, and Naruto was not blushing for any reason. She made a mental note to interrogate Naruto later. Plaster Face had entered the classroom. Alright, there's been a change of plans today, so we won't be covering chakra types until the afternoon. Instead of that in the morning, you'll be given a presentation in your separate classes. Girls, go to Hana in room 12. Boys, you're with me and Katetsu, and Iruka in room 15. Go. There was the sound of feet moving down the aisle and towards the doorway, grumbling voices, and questions on what they may be doing. Naruto was about to part ways with Ino as she normally would for these classes, when she was stopped by Plaster Face. Naruto, you'll be going with the girls this time. What? Why? I'm in the boys' class. I don't do that stupid flower stuff. I'm sorry Naruto, but this is a bit different. You have to go with the girls. But, I'm sorry Naruto, but you have to go. Naruto growled several uncomplimentary words under her breath as she turned in the direction of room 15, hurrying to catch up with Ino. Ino almost had a heart attack when she popped up beside her. Naruto explained things as best she could, which wasn't really that well since Izumo hadn't told her much. She sat down with Ino, stating that she would bring pain and misfortune upon Izumo if she had to faff around with daffodils, or worse, tea ceremony. Hana entered the room with a TV. On a rolling table, there was excitement. They didn't often get to watch videos. Technology wasn't used much amongst ninjas. They had more reliable methods, though they were slightly more cumbersome. Alright, I'm not going to bother telling you what this is about. Just watch the video and you'll get it. Any questions can wait till the end, and no Naruto, it's nothing to do with flower arrangement or tea ceremony. Naruto breathed a sigh of relief. Dog Lady wouldn't lie. She hated the stuff as much as she did, and she was stuck teaching the stuff. Poor Dog Lady. Hana pushed the video into the slot on the video player, and a bright pink screen flashed onto the screen. The speakers were blaring some sort of sickening, syrupy, supposedly cheery music as bold lettering in fancy script flashed on the screen. You and your body. Naruto wondered if it was too late to run out of the room when the sugar-coated voice-over blasted throughout the room. The video could handle, she already knew this stuff. The old geezer had got a Yame to tell her after he caught her riffling through his porn collection a year or so ago. Yes, the video she could care less about, but if she had to put up with this freaky Belinda lady throughout the video. She shivered. Sasuke cringed as Izumo accidentally ripped the condom they were supposed to be placing over a plastic dummy. Iruka wasn't doing much better. He couldn't explain anything without turning beet red, and spent half his time trying to keep Izumo and Katetsu in line. The video hadn't been very informative, in fact it was downright useless, but he sincerely doubted the condom was supposed to rip like that. It sort of defeated the point of the whole thing. Even worse, now that he knew what his father had been freaking out over last week, he had images of the other stuff popping up in his head. Involving his blonde benchmate. He didn't even mean to think about it, Naruto just appeared in his head. Was this puberty? He already hated it, and if that dodgy video was anything to go by, he hadn't even started it yet. It sounded horrible. How come Itachi got to skip this? His father was right. He had just randomly gone from 12-year-old Itachi to 16-year-old Itachi overnight. Stupid Itachi. I can't believe you ripped it. Boys, that's what you're not supposed to do, okay? Shut up. You were the one who said to roll down faster. Because you took too long, Izumo. I hope you don't take this long in real life, cause if so then. Are you trying to imply something? Katetsu, Izumo, calm down Naruto? Sasuke jerked his head to the doorway and internally cringed. He had noticed earlier that she had had a wardrobe change but had paid no heed, but now. Of all the days for Naruto to change her wardrobe. Stupid blonde. She was wearing slightly puffy trousers that ended just above her knee with an orange belt. Along with a pair of ninja boots that ended mid-thigh instead of her usual sandals, she had wrapped gray bandages around her upper torso. Over the top, an orange jacket, and her gloves on her hands. He didn't want to admit he was staring at her wrappings, but he was. After that video, it was impossible not to. Not that there was anything there, but he and his classmates had been introduced the idea of hormones. Sasuke was quickly learning what a formidable force hormones could be. She walked into the room and stared at the contraption on the desk, then at Katetsu and Izumo. She gave them a withering look. You know, that's not how you're supposed to put a condom on. They stared at her. Sasuke just knew she was going to do something, he knew it. This was just like the first time she entered the class when she was 6 years old. Katetsu had that same freaked out look on his face as he'd had when he'd finished talking to the Hokage. He was not surprised. Naruto plucked one of the condom wrappers of the pile they were presumably to use for practice. She opened the packet, pulled out the rubber contraption, and pulled the ripped one off the plastic model. She stared at the brown lump of plastic and snorted. "That looks more like a turd than a penis," she stated, clearly not impressed. Ignoring the looks of horror from the tutors, she took the new condom and in one quick motion had it in place of the old one, distinctly unripped. She turned to Kotetsu and Izumo. "That is how you put on a condom," she informed them before turning to Iruka, seemingly oblivious to their shock. "Oi, Dolphin, can I sit in here and study? I already know this stuff, and that lady on the girl's video makes me want to kill something. That woman sounds like a strangled cat that got high on something. It's traumatic." Sasuke was tempted to tell her she had likely traumatized Iruka, Kotetsu and Izumo without even thinking about it. But this was far too amusing. Besides, if Naruto stayed, he could ogle some more. He'd given up on fighting this newfound curiosity. It was pointless when his thoughts were going to drift that way every 3 seconds anyway. "I don't know if that's such a good idea, Naruto. The boys aren't done yet, so." "Please, Iruka-sensei? I don't want to go back to that stupid video. That lady sounds like a doped-up cat with a bad voice box." Sasuke didn't bother to suppress his tiny snort. This was hilarious. Iruka's face was priceless. The guy was positively scandalized. "I really don't think so. I mean," Iruka fumbled for the correct and proper wording. "If you're worried about the boys ogling me, I don't care. Three's nothing to ogle. Besides, it's a compliment." In a weird, obscure way, Kiba burst out laughing almost immediately after she had finished speaking. He was soon joined by Choji and even Shikamaru. Sasuke allowed himself to laugh a small amount himself. Iruka seemed like he was going to object, but Naruto ignored him and trotted up to her seat next to Sasuke. She plopped down into her seat, oblivious to the boy next to her furiously trying not to blush. During break, she disappeared for a few minuets before returning with a small pink hardback. Sasuke felt alarms ringing in his head, but he was far too curious to care. She gestured to the boys to gather round and there was a small formed around the desk they shared. "What's that?" Kiba asked, gesturing to the book. "This, boys, is porn." "Porn?" Choji looked confused. He'd heard his dad and uncle using the word, but he didn't actually know what it was. Basically, someone was perverted enough to write about people having. She stated boredly, as if she didn't find the book all that impressive. "There are pictures too. It's seriously weird sometimes though. There's something to do with whipped cream, it's odd. If you're having, why do you need cream or food or Choji?" "Hey, Choji, wake up. Just leave him, he'll wake up when he gets hungry again," Shikamaru said lazily. He wanted to read that book, for the sake of curiosity. "Hurry up and open it, Naruto. I want to see." Kiba egged on eagerly. "Fine, but this one isn't all that good. The stuff in the old geezer's desk drawer is way better," she said, as if warning them they were about to be disappointed. A year later, and graduation day had finally arrived. Naruto was just as rambunctious, Sasuke was just as quiet and Ino equally loud-mouthed. Naruto had finally come to terms with her unusual memory process, and used it to her advantage just as Sasuke had suggested. After memorizing the information from their textbooks, she reread it until she understood what she was being told. She worked on the more active side of her studies with Sasuke and Ino, and they were normally found in the top 3 rankings after tests, Naruto and Ino switching back and forth between 2nd and 3rd place. On one occasion, however, Naruto managed to snatch first from Sasuke, much to his consternation. The day of the graduation exam had gone well. She had been able to exert enough control over her chakra to create the 3 clones required, thanks to Ino drilling the control into her. However, one of the other teachers who seemed to dislike her had forced Iruka to fail her on a technicality. Mizuki had given her a different option, and she had taken it gladly. After stealing the Forbidden Scroll, she had mastered the Shadow Clone technique with the hopes of graduating with her 2 friends. Then everything had gone pear-shaped when Mizuki told her of the demon that had taken up residence in her gut, and Dolphin had gotten himself stabbed in the back by a giant shuriken. Thankfully, things had ended with Mizuki's arrest, and the old geezer had given her a proper explanation, instead of Mizuki's blatant yelling and curse-riddled one. Having come to terms with this new burden, she had been given her headband, and been sent home to get some rest before graduation. Mr. F. a recent upgrade from Perma Frown, had given her a visit, presumably having been informed of her adventures by the old geezer, and left her with a bowl of dodgy-smelling leftover stew. After sampling the stew, she decided once and for all that Sasuke was right. No one in his family could cook anything that could be considered food. Naruto found this slightly pathetic considering their abilities as ninjas, but she couldn't really talk. She couldn't make a decent meal unless it involved a microwave or boiling water either. So despite that unplanned event, Naruto found herself sitting in her usual seat between Ino and Sasuke. Dolphin was almost finished reading out the list of genin cells, but she was still waiting for her name to be called out. She sincerely hoped she wouldn't be put on a team with Sakura. She didn't find the girl to be mean or anything, but she was a bit Sasuke crazy. Naruto's close relationship with Sasuke was something the pink-haired girl was particularly pleased with. In short, she just gave her a headache. Team 10, consisting of Choji Akamichi, Sakura Haruno, and Shikamaru Nara, will be led by Asuma Sarutobi. A few jaws dropped at this unexpected setup. Naruto was glad she was not placed with the pink-haired girl, though she did pity Choji and Shikamaru. It was strange though, she had expected Ino to be placed with them, reincarnating their father's squad. Dolphin read out the names of a few more teams, and Naruto's eyes widened in realization by the time her reached the end of the list. She felt Sasuke stiffen in the seat on her left as he too caught on. This leaves Sasuke Uchiha, Naruto Uzumaki, and Ino Yamanaka in Team 7. Under Kakashi Hitaki, Iruka had barely finished reading out the list of teams before he was bombarded with questions from the new genin candidates. What? How come Sasuke has Naruto on his team? One boy yelled indignantly. Despite her brazen attitude and non-girl-like qualities, Naruto had somehow gathered a few fans. It was not very many, perhaps 5 or 6 out of the 2 classes, but they were there. Naruto was oblivious to their presence, something Sasuke seemed to find vexing. Oi Dolphin, I thought I was going to be placed with Choji and Shikamaru. Ino said, clearly confused with her placement. Iruka sighed. He had expected this, but he was afraid he didn't have very many answers for them. I don't make up the teams, if you have any complaints you'll have to talk to the Jonin commander. He's the one who makes up the teams based on your reports. Iruka informed the boy, who grumbled several derogatory comments to himself. As for you Ino, Iruka turned his attention to the stunned blonde girl. I was told to inform you you'll still receive private training with Shikamaru and Choji. But the Hokage wanted to try a different cell setup to the usual 2 boys 1 girl cells. He smiled at the 3 students, noting the equal looks of surprise on the faces of Sasuke and Naruto. If you 3 get along well together, we may start using this kind of cell setup for other teams, he explained. So we're guinea pigs? Naruto asked, clearly offended by the idea. Iruka silently prayed she wouldn't make too big of a fuss about the situation. He understood her dislike of being used as a test subject, especially after the previous night's events, but this was for the good of the village in the long run, if it worked out at any rate. Well no, but, Iruka searched for the words he needed to explain, but he couldn't seem to find them. Thankfully Naruto seemed to understand and dropped the subject. Iruka was about to dismiss them for their lunch, when another voice spoke up, Sakura's voice. How come Naruto and Ino get to go with Sasuke? She demanded. Several other girls voiced their own agreements, though not quite as loudly as Sakura. Iruka rubbed his temples in frustration. Since this is a trial team formation, the Hokage wanted our best students on the team to maximize efficiency. Sakura. Naruto has exactly the same scores as Sasuke, and Ino is a very close second, therefore they were chosen for the team. What? But my scores in the test were higher than Ino's were. Sakura objected. Iruka reminded himself that she was a child, and hitting her would count as abuse whether she was trained as a ninja or not. True, you did score better than Ino on the theory, but your overall physical skills are taken into account for the final grade, and yours were none too impressive. Sakura, Iruka informed her in a tone which told the class he was no longer willing to answer any of their questions for the time being. Sakura huffed petulantly, but remained silent through Iruka's lecture on what it meant to be a Konoha ninja. Naruto also remained silent, but as soon as Iruka dismissed them for their lunch she glomped Sasuke, who, if you looked closely, blushed, and then Ino. She even squealed. This scared Sasuke somewhat. In all the years he had known her, squealing was not something he would normally associate with her. He associated squealing with normal girls. Naruto was distinctly not a normal girl. It had taken him half a year to come to terms with the strange affecting for the non-girl, as he referred to her as inside his head, and he was used to her unnormalness. It was strange to see her doing something as normal as squealing along with Ino as she did. He breathed a sigh of relief when they stopped to drag him outside to eat their, Ino's, lunch. After 3 hours of waiting, not including their lunch hour, Naruto, Sasuke and Ino found themselves sitting on the roof with a masked, gray-haired man. "Are you sure you should be a jonin at your age?" Naruto asked, noting the gray hair. Ino, seated on her left, nodded vehemently. Sasuke gave him an inquiring look. "I'm 26, you little trolls," he informed them. They stared at him for several moments before he was suddenly attacked by the darker blonde. She was furiously grabbing at his orange book. His eye widened in confusion. "Is that Icha? Can I read it?" "Please let me read it, Scarecrow," she begged, aiming another swipe at the small orange hardback. Kakashi avoided it easily, though he still looked very confused. Even Enko glared at the book, and this small female child was practically fighting him for ownership. A look at the other two trolls showed the other blonde on the ground in hysterics, and the Uchiha boy seeming unsurprised. Maybe later," he said to the smallest of the trolls, effectively pacifying her for now. "Why don't you introduce yourselves? We already know each other," Sasuke stated. Kakashi twitched. "You may, but I don't." "Sure you do. The old geezer'll have given you our files with our status and capabilities on them," Naruto informed him. Kakashi fought down the urge to growl at the girl. She was still giving his book a manic look. "I tell you what, I'll go first, and then you copy me." "Okay." They nodded, and Kakashi replaced his book in his shuriken pouch. "My name is Kakashi Hitaki, I like lots of things. I have some dislikes, and my dreams are none of your business." "Uchiha brat, you can go first." Sasuke bristled at the Uchiha brat comment, but soon turned it into an evil-looking smirk. "My name is Kakashi Hitaki, I like lots of things. I have some dislikes, and my dreams are none of your business." "Uchiha brat, you can go first," he repeated. Ino and Naruto collapsed into gales of laughter, and Sasuke gave Kakashi an evil grin. "That's not what I meant, you little brat. But you said to copy you sensei." "Sasuke just did what you said to do," Ino countered, grinning like a cat that caught a mouse and found the cream. Kakashi's visible eye was beginning to develop a permanent tic. Why did he agree to take a team this year? Oh yes, the perverted girl was his mentor's daughter. TCH, stupid emotional involvement. That meant he'd have to put up with their manic psycho-ness. "I meant do the same thing, but change it to suit yourselves. Now why don't we try that again, Mr. Broody?" He spoke through gritted teeth to Sasuke. The paler blonde cackled. Sasuke smirked and took up where he left off. "I'm Sasuke Uchiha. I like training in tomatoes with sugar." He gave Naruto a pointed look, and she stuck her tongue out in retaliation. Some other stuff." His eyes flicked back to Naruto and an almost invisible blush flashed across his cheeks for a brief moment. "I hate my dad and my brother's attempts at cooking, my own cooking, the crazy girls who stalk me, and when Naruto and Ino get their time of the month. Their shit scar ow." Naruto crashed her fist down onto his skull, and Ino gave him one of her feared elbow-to-stomach maneuvers. "My dream is, to be a good ninja like my brother, I guess." He spoke after recovering from the joint attack. His gaze flickered to Naruto again, but the girl didn't seem to notice. The other blonde harpy did, however, and her eyes flashed with some sort of emotion that made the Jonin nervous for some reason. "Witchy, you're up." Kakashi smiled through at his mask at Ino. Ino glared at him, and Kakashi wondered if it was a good idea to irritate a girl who could invade his consciousness with a few hand signs. "I'm Ino Yamanaka. I like gardening, training, meddling, and irritating people. Well, one in particular, but that ain't your beeswax, Scarecrow." Kakashi could have sworn Sasuke let out a pained whimper, but that was impossible. Brooders like him did not whimper. It made them look more human and less broody, thus, he could not have whimpered. "I dislike slugs, my dad's, Naruto's, and Sasuke's cooking, and stupid people." She flashed a concerned glance in Naruto's direction. Kakashi took this to mean she was referring to the villagers' unfounded hatred of the girl. He knew the other two were yet to learn about the fox, not the blonde herself, since they were the 3 top-ranked student from this year's batch of fresh meat. My aims are to be the first female head of the interrogation department, be a good clan leader, and another thing that's none of your beeswax. Sasuke seemed to whimper again, and Kakashi began to wonder if he was hearing things. And, Whiskers, Kakashi nodded somewhat warily towards Naruto. Naruto Uzumaki. I like ramen, training, gardening, salty tomatoes, she glared at Sasuke pointedly. Sasuke ignored her. And Icha when I can get my hands on it. I dislike perverts who peek in women in the hot springs and stuff. Reading is one thing, stalking is different. I dislike Mr. F's, man ladies, duck butts and psychics cooking, along with my own. My goal is to be Hokage. Kakashi hoped his team would fail his test. He could already imagine the constant headache they would give him. Unfortunately, he had a sickening feeling they would pass with flying colors. Eventually, at any rate. Are you sure it's okay? Naruto asked, slightly taken aback by Sasuke's request. Yeah, Naruto and I eat a ton of food, Sasuke. Ino informed him warningly. Sasuke nodded. He was already aware of how much food the two could consume given the chance. Dad already told me to bring you 2 over after we finished. I guess he already knew we'd be put on the same team. Naruto was slightly amazed by this statement, and wondered if Mr. F could perhaps see the future. Whoa, that's creepy. It's like that weird lady who tells fortunes near the dango shop. Ino asked as they made their way out of the academy gates. Says the girl whose family reads minds like books, Naruto retorted. Shut up, it's still weird. Weird or not, do you really think we should listen to him about the no breakfast thing? Sasuke asked. He was in 2 minds about the whole thing. He got the impression it was part of the strange Jonin's twisted payback scheme for the old comment. I'm not missing out on breakfast. I love my breakfast. Besides, I tend to die of starvation if I don't eat something in the morning. So no, I'm not listening. Naruto stated. Idiot, if he says no to eat then don't eat. Ino yelled. He's a Jonin. He knows what he's talking about, stupid. Sasuke considered this but found himself siding with Naruto. He liked his tomato pancakes at breakfast, damn it. They parted ways with Ino, agreeing to meet up at the entrance to the Spice Avenue. He accompanied Naruto to her house, waiting outside the small apartment while she changed. She emerged in her scruffy black t-shirt and orange shorts, and they were soon waiting for Ino outside one of the spice shops. Naruto's eyes seemed to sparkle with excitement as she watched the trades haggling back and forth, arguing of the prices of cinnamon and saffron. Sasuke imagined that had she not become a ninja, she would have taken up an apprenticeship with one of the merchants. They didn't seem to mind her as much as the other villagers, in fact, they were downright friendly. Sasuke guessed this was because of the wide variety of people they met through their sales. He'd seen some people from one of the desert countries past Wind Country once. The men had been covered in body paint and the women had strange rings around their necks, stretching them upwards. It had been one of the oddest things he'd ever seen. Since the merchants here had to deal with such a wide variety of people on a daily basis, Sasuke figured they were more open-minded than the other villagers. Though why they should be in the first place he didn't know. Oi, Naruto, one of the merchants yelled, waving them over. Naruto was gone before Sasuke realized she had heard him. The noise of the sellers was deafening. It was a food stand similar to Ichiraku's. The smells of spice issuing from the small stall made his mouth water. Heya Masashi. Naruto greeted the man exuberantly, giving him a suffocating hug. The old man laughed, ruffling her hair. How are you, kid? Haven't seen you around here in a while. Been training. She pointed at the forehead protector she had strapped to her arm instead of its usual position around her neck. I passed the exam. That Mizuki git tried to fail me on a technicality that no one cares about, but Dolphin showed him where he could shove it. She grinned. The old man smiled. That's great news. Have you had your test yet? Nah, it's tomorrow. Scarecrow's lazy. He was 3 hours late this morning. She fumed. So you're in Kakashi's group. I pity you, kid. He's supposed to be a real hard ass with his tests. Sasuke wondered how a civilian knew so much about the ninja setup, and about their new teacher, but decided he would ask Naruto at some other time. TFT. All I have to do is steal his porn and he'll be putty in our hands. She grinned. Sasuke had the distinct impression she would probably forget to give him the book back if she did steal it from him. In fact, it was really a matter of waiting. Oh, this is Duck Butt. Remember I told you about him? He's my teammate, Ino too. Naruto pulled Sasuke into the man's field of vision. He had been hovering just outside the shop, hoping to avoid notice. The man grinned and Sasuke got a close-up of him. He wore an eye patch and seemed to have a wooden pole for a leg. One of his hands looked like it had been reattached at some point, and the opposite was missing his two outer fingers. Burns and scars were evident on his face and on the skin of his chest, not hidden by his short burgundy houri. He looks like he's been through the interrogation unit 3 times over. Sasuke exclaimed to himself. Nice to meet you, kid. Mind telling me your real name? Kiddo here seems to have a distaste for them. He nodded towards Naruto, grinning. The girl pouted. Sasuke Uchiha. Uchiha, huh? I used to know. Hey, you look like Makoto. You Fugaku's kid? Yeah, Sasuke replied somewhat warily. This guy knew his mother? You know Mr. F. Masashi? Naruto asked, clearly just as shocked as he was. That'd be telling, wouldn't it? He grinned. Sasuke noticed this man had the same sadistic streak as Naruto and Ino did occasionally. He presumed this man was the source of it. Listen, I've been working on a new recipe and I want to test it out before going public with it. You got time to try it out? He asked. Naruto's face fell. What? This is such bad luck. We're going to Duck Butt's fro dinner. Can you put a rain check on it, Masashi? I promise I'll come back and try it. Please, 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 please. She wheedled, putting her hands together in a prayer sign. Sasuke caught sight of those eyes she sometimes used unconsciously, the ones even his father couldn't resist for long. Those eyes were truly fearsome. He shuddered to think what should happen if she figured out how to use them on purpose. Masashi laughed. Sure kiddo, just be quick about it. No, hurry up and get going. I think Ino's about to pull her hair out, and you know what she'll be like if that happens. Naruto paled and hurried away from the shop towards Ino. She really was beginning to pull her hair. There was a garbled, "see ya, later," over the roar of the crowd. Sasuke felt like pulling his own hair out. He said goodbye to the merchant before hurrying after her. I pity you. Being assigned to Kakashi-senpai was not an experience I'd hurry to repeat, Itachi stated seriously after the 3 future genin had completed recounting their tale of their first team meeting. Naruto noted that Fugaku seemed unusually withdrawn, even he would normally have some sort of comment to make. Apparently Ino noticed this too. Is Scarecrow really that bad, Mr. F? She asked, trying to chew through what was supposed to be a weird flat meat called a burger. Apparently it was popular in Lightning Country. Sasuke's father had picked some up on an excursion there. Naruto didn't find the meat particularly appetizing, but that could have been Fugaku's cooking instead of the actual burger. He has high standards. He also has punctuality issues, Fugaku stated. He gave his own burger a disgusted glare. This thing tastes nothing like those sold in Kumo. Wait, you mean being 3 hours late is normal? Ino asked, clearly horrified. Weren't ninja supposed to be prompt? Usually it's 4 hours. He must have decided to be early since it was your first meeting, Itachi mused. Ino seemed to be growing ever more unimpressed with their new teacher by the second. The rest of the dinner was uneventful. Naruto and Ino near forced the 3 Uchihas into conversation, but that was to be expected. It was so uneventful that Ino and Itachi grew bored. That was a bad thing. A bored Ino usually meant some form of sadistic torture. Ino called it fun, was to be dished out to those in the immediate vicinity. A bored Itachi usually meant some form of mind game that was only enjoyable to him. They were a formidable team when they formed an alliance in the valiant battle against boredom. As Fugaku, finally so disgusted with the meal, he had to find some other form of nourishment, was kept busy in the kitchen. Ino gained a dangerous glint in her eye as she watched Naruto holding conversation with Sasuke. A somewhat jittery Sasuke. Ino made a show of trying to cut up the burger until her fork pinged across the table and onto the floor, landing beside Naruto's feet. Jesus, this thing isn't even organic. It's like rubber. Can you pick up my fork for me, Naruto? She asked. Not noticing her friend's plotting, Naruto did as requested. Sasuke watched her bend over to pick up the fork from its position on the floor between their chairs. Itachi, who had been watching Ino with a raised eyebrow, saw Ino make a pushing motion. He frowned in confusion, not quite understanding her plot. Push him, she mouthed at him across the table. Itachi's eyes shone with humor. and he moved his knife across the tough meat of his own burger. His elbow made a slightly enforced contact with Sasuke's back. Sasuke felt himself falling towards Naruto as she pulled her head back up to above the table. She had been back in her seat for but a second before an abnormal weight sent her crashing to the floor. The chair smashed to pieces underneath her and she felt something soft crash into her lips. Something weird and slimy had found its way into her mouth. Focusing her eyes, she saw a pair of soft charcoal eyes staring at her own in shock. Good God, what on earth is going on in here? Fugaku yelled from the doorway. See you later, Sasuke said quietly as she left the house. Naruto stood waiting for him at the gate and Fugaku watched their interaction closely. He had been worried that little prank from Ino and Itachi, he couldn't believe Itachi even knew what a prank was, would have caused a rift between them, but it had done the opposite. Fugaku didn't know if this was better or worse. He wanted them to get along, of course, but he'd been noticing they were growing closer than he was comfortable with lately. This could all be avoided if simply told them the truth, but he couldn't do that. They were too young to be brought into the messier side of life just yet. And that's exactly what Fugaku would describe the whole scenario as, a mess. Itachi emerged from the bathroom, hair dripping from the shower and loose. Fugaku had his suspicions that the Yamanaka girl would have been grinning manically had she been around to see it. Has Sasuke left for his test already? He asked. Fugaku nodded. He was about to leave his son to his own devices, but then he remembered his part in that little accident the night before. Itachi, take care that no mishaps such as that which occurred last night take place from now on. His son's genial aura disappeared before his eyebrows had moved into the frown now decorating his face. Fugaku didn't like that frown. It told him Itachi was getting more suspicious than he already was. I can't see how it would be a problem, father. Naruto is pretty much family anyway. She and Sasuke have been close for years. This was bound to happen eventually. You have no problems with her, you are her sponsor. I can't see any reason as to why she and Sasuke taking things a step beyond friendship should bother you so much. Itachi knew that neither of the two had actually said anything to each other yet, but like he had told his father, it was simply a matter of playing the waiting game. He could already tell Sasuke was growing increasingly frustrated with the stalemated they were locked in. I don't have the time to discuss this. Just don't let it happen again. His father snapped in reply before moving briskly down the hallway towards his office. That was different. He must be very on edge if he was snapping at him. It took a lot to put his father on edge. Apparently Naruto's relation to his father was much more complicated than he had originally thought. As his father slammed the door of his office, Itachi made a silent promise to find out just what skeletons his father was hiding from them, and what Naruto's relation to those skeletons were. Ino Yamanaka was in a very good mood when she was left in charge of the flower shop. She had landed an afternoon shift, and that meant she had time to sit back and read up on some of the family techniques she didn't know yet. Afternoons were always quiet for some reason. For other shops it was the other way around, but apparently people wanted flowers in the morning. Her team had passed their test with flying colors. Well, eventually at any rate. Kakashi still had to tie Sasuke to the tree stump though. The boy was smart, but he still suffered from being too full of pride sometimes. She and Naruto had force-fed him though, and his somewhat reluctant chewing had saved them from repeating the academy again. She had noticed that he and her best friend had left together in the direction of the graveyard, somewhat closer than normal. That had almost made her jump up and down with glee. Her little matchmaking plot had worked perfectly. Then again, those two were somewhat easy to manipulate with this sort of thing. If only it were that easy with Itachi. Ino's thoughts trailed away from the pair and towards Sasuke's older brother. Having once been a Sasuke fangirl herself, she couldn't understand what she had been doing chasing Sasuke for those few years when his older brother was just plain wire. Not to mention, after getting to know him better, she discovered a wicked sense of humor that matched her own almost perfectly. Only Naruto had managed that feat. Ino, now, if only she could turn that prudish streak into a perverted one, she'd have it made. Wait, was someone talking to her? Shit, how long had they been there? It had better not be that creepy woman who lived above Naruto again. She took way too long picking stuff out. Not to mention she was just plain creepy. Ino, are you feeling unwell? Ino looked around for the source of the voice and nearly fell of her seat when she saw Itachi Uchiha standing in the middle of her family's flower shop. Oh dear God, he had his hair loose. And he was worried. He looked hot when he was worried. Wait, worried? Why was he worried? It couldn't be her. He knew better than to do that unless she was dead or dying. Something he'd learned the hard way. So if it wasn't her absent-mindedness, it was something else. She couldn't imagine him having any problems on a mission, poulies, or with women. She knew his problem in that area all too well. That meant, something happened at home? Nah, I'm all good. Just off in dreamland, man lady. So, what are you doing here? I'm presuming you want some flowers. 'Cause if you want groceries, you need to be talking to Mrs. Haraguchi over the road. HF, for God's sake, why was she rambling? She was supposed to be analyzing him, not turning into a blob of jelly. Damn his good looks. Where was her Yamanaka pride when she needed it? And why the hell was she using Naruto's nickname for him? That wasn't part of the plan, damn it. Itachi stared at her. Obviously her rambling had stunted him a bit. It gave her the perfect chance to analyze his facial expression. That set of the eyebrows, he was worried definitely, but there was something else. Anger maybe? No, it wasn't anger. Well, maybe a bit of anger, but not enough to be concerned about. She knew she should have read that book on facial psychology when her brother had finished with it. You alright? You seem like something's bothering you. Itachi was stunned by her ability to read his facial expressions so easily. He had noticed her eyes flicking over him, observing everything from his stance to his hair. She seemed to have a strange stroke when she did that. But she had almost immediately picked up on his leftover feelings of discomfort after talking with his father. He supposed this was to be expected from one of the Yamanaka, and he knew her father well enough to know he was an extremely competent interrogator. He would not have expected a genin to pick up on it though, much less a girl as brazen as Ino. He wondered how many of her family techniques she knew. If she could get this out of him at this age, she would be a formidable interrogator in the future. Such was her goal according to Sasuke. You can tell? I'm impressed. He was alarmed when her eyes brightened so rapidly. Why would a simple compliment have such an effect? It was the truth, and he knew of no reason she should react so strongly to a few words. Reading a face is nothing for Yamanakas. She waved her hand in the air nonchalantly. I'm still learning though, I keep bunking off my study time. I can only tell because I know you so well. If you'd been an enemy ninja, I'd have been completely stuck. You want to see talent at reading faces, go look for Inouro. Inouro? He asked, unfamiliar with the name. My younger twin. He's a freaking prodigy at reading faces, but he sucks at mind techniques. He was in a different class to me in the academy, so you wouldn't have met him. Ino smirked at him then. She was perfectly aware of his little avoidance maneuver. She was well practiced in them. How could she not be being friends with the village prankster? She'd never forget worming her way out of cleaning the Hokage mountain. Naruto had been seething. But that doesn't tell me what's bothering you now, does it? She asked, grinning. She frowned when she was met with silence. Come on Itachi, spill the beans before I reunite you with my elbow maneuver, she added in all seriousness. Itachi didn't want to be reunited with the elbow maneuver. That had been painful, and Itachi could tell she was being very serious with her threats. But he wasn't sure sharing his concerns was a good idea. Then again, Sasuke voiced his concerns to him and Naruto occasionally, and it only seemed to work in his benefit, particularly if he sought out Naruto. Was it a long shot to think sharing his own concerns wouldn't have the same effect? Ino was fairly reliable, and despite her love of gossip, she knew when to keep her mouth shut. Father is not happy with the current state of affairs regarding Sasuke and Naruto. He spoke, after a long pause for thought. You mean he doesn't want them to date? Ino clarified into everyday language. Itachi nodded. Why? Naruto might as well live with you guys. Them two finally hitting it off isn't going to change all that much. I had reached a similar conclusion. I suspect my father is withholding information of importance concerning Naruto, and this information is the source of his unease. He has never given a proper explanation as to why he chose to be her sponsor, and I can only think he knows something we do not. Ino frowned for a moment, replaying the information in her head. He had a point there. Mr. F had never told Naruto why he had sponsored her, and he wasn't the type to make a gesture of such magnitude without an extremely good reason. Ino had a suspicion it was all linked to Naruto's family somehow, but she put that theory on the back burner. Whatever it is, you shouldn't worry about them so much. They're both too stubborn to let anything get in their way, be it ninja-wise or in romance. I swear you are just as bad sometimes. Ino couldn't help but be grateful for that though. If he hadn't been so stubborn in terms of work, he'd probably be taken. That was bad for her long-term plans. Itachi was confused, he was no longer worried. Why was he no longer worried though? Was it because of Ino's words? Did his and Naruto's words have the same effect on Sasuke? This was so odd, but somewhat refreshing as well. This made it all the more strange to Itachi. Whatever, you want flowers for your mum's grave, right? She asked before cursing her mistake. How did you know that? Itachi asked, genuinely surprised. Ino felt like pulling her hair out. She could hardly say it was because his face always looked glum and happy-ish when he was intending to visit Mrs. M. Could she? He'd ask how she knew his face looked like that, and then he'd eventually find out she was a stalker in the making, and that would be so bad for her confidence, and he'd think she was weird. Okay, I admit it. I probed your mind a little bit. I've been practicing and wanted to see if I could actually get past that Uchiha face of yours. Score. That was an awesome save. It wasn't a total lie either, she had been practicing the mind probe technique. The fact that it still left her nursing a headache for 4 hours after she used it was a completely different matter. Sure, she hadn't actually used it on Itachi. But he didn't need to know that. Ah, I see. I wanted carnations, the dyed ones if you have them. He looked around the shop, presumably searching for the said flowers. We keep those in the back while they're absorbing the color, but I think the last batch is done. I'll go check. She hurriedly dashed into the storage room at the back of the shop, and found her assumptions had been correct, before hurrying back with the tray of plants. Just take your pick, she instructed, laying the tray down on the counter with a thunk. They had a lot of these for some reason, and the tray was always heavy, but hardly anyone ever bought them. Ino suspected it was her father's way of passing the time during the slow days since they always seemed to be strewn about the house in vases. Itachi immediately picked out a bunch the white flowers streaked with red. Ino wrapped them up in cellophane and handed them back. 3 ryo and 20 denarii please. Itachi handed over the money, giving her the tiniest smile of gratitude. Ino had to grab hold of the countertop with one hand to keep herself from fainting right there. If you don't mind me asking, why carnations? They aren't really anything spectacular and they die pretty quickly when they've been dyed like that. Ino gestured to the flowers in his hand. I agree, they are a somewhat flimsy plant, but I believe mother was fond of them, he replied in his quiet voice. For some reason Ino suddenly remembered her blonde friend's affection for the unimpressive plants. Really? So does Naruto. She hates gardening with a passion, unless you can get poison or something from the plant you're growing. She says it's for wussies, but she has those things all over her apartment. I didn't know that, he mused aloud. Itachi stared at her as she said this, but Ino was too busy talking to notice. He narrowed his eyes as the cogs in his head turned rapidly. That wasn't something he'd noticed before, but now that he knew of it he could see other similarities between Naruto and his mother. Qualities that existed in himself and Sasuke. Well, I must be going. I have a mission this evening. Thank you for the flowers, he nodded his head politely before making his way back out of the door. He paused before leaving, and turned back to the secretly flustered girl at the counter. Congratulations on passing your test. Till next time Ino, he stated before disappearing out of the shop door. Ino stood paralyzed for several moments before she dissolved into a jelly-like pile on the floor. Shit, he's hot. You're serious? We don't have to chase after that rabid cat again? Naruto asked, hopping up and down gleefully. Ino had a hopeful glint in her eyes, and even Sasuke had perked up at the Hokage's statement. Yes Naruto, I think you and your team have proven yourselves capable of handling AC rank, the old Hokage said smiling. By gaining the ability to perform at AC rank level, does that mean you'll let me read your Icha books? No. The Hokage choked. He saw the girl's teacher discreetly hide his own orange book in a different kunai pouch. He probably should have warned him about this when he first told him who his new students would be, but he seemed to have found out anyway. It was his own fault for leaving his books where they could have been found so easily really. He had known Naruto snoop through his drawers sometimes. Damn, what kind of mission is it Hokage-sama? Sasuke asked, giving the blonde girl a withering look. You'll be escorting a bridge builder to the Wave Country, one of the provinces on Fire Country's coastline. The Hokage replied. He made a motion to a burn-scarred Chunin. The Chunin walked through a pair of double doors, and returned moments later with a man wearing a rice farmer's hat and carrying a bottle of sake in a brown paper bag. "You called for me, Hokage-sama?" he asked. The Hokage nodded. "We have an available escort group for you, Mr. Tazuna." He motioned a hand in direction of Team 7. The man stared at them with scathing disappointment. "I asked for ninja, not a bunch of bratty kids pretending to be ninja," he objected. Kakashi began to panic beneath his mask. If he had learned only one thing about his first team, it was that none of them had good tempers, and all of them were very violent when provoked, especially the girls. It took a bit more to get Sasuke riled up, but he was sure the man's comment was one of those things. He braced his muscles, ready to grab them by the collar when they exploded. He waited for several moments, but the explosion did not come. Taking a closer look at his trolls, he could make out a sweet, girlish smile on Ino's face. Sasuke had adopted a withdrawn, blank look, and Naruto was smiling the same cheerful smile she normally did. Kakashi shivered. His genin were more than mad, they were severely pissed off. He could see the doubt in the Hokage's face already, and wondered if he shouldn't request a different C rank instead. He really didn't want to know what kind of torturous revenge his team were planning for their new client. "I will so be Hokage Ino. Believe it," Naruto yelled at the pale blonde, gesticulating wildly with her arms. Kakashi wished she could shout less loudly. Not only was it unprofessional, it kept him from reading his book in peace. Not that he could really get any peace with these three acting like they were. He felt sorry for Tazuna. At least he knew they were being deliberately annoying, and could ignore it to some extent. As far as Tazuna was concerned, this was their normal behavior and he would have to put up their antics for the entire journey to Wave Country. Kakashi had to compliment their ingenuity though. Tazuna had claimed they were nothing more than brats pretending to be ninja, so that was what they had given him. Poor bloke. No way Naruto. Sasuke's going to be Hokage, and then he's going to marry me. "Aren't you Sasuke?" Ino asked in a syrupy voice, leaning towards the only boy on the team. Sasuke ignored them both. The only sound he had made since leaving the Hokage's office had been a non-committal grunt. Tazuna was, for the record, severely irritated. He knew they were acting so irritatingly on purpose. He just knew it. He also knew that their actions would become distinctly less annoying were he to apologize for the "brat" comment. But there was no way in the name of the 5 territories he was going to apologize to a bunch of 12-year-olds. Well, the two girls looked about 12. The moody boy looked about a year older. The pale blonde noted a puddle in the middle of the road some distance ahead of them. "Hey Naruto, let's go jump in that puddle," she squealed. Tazuna covered his ears. "And why should I do what you say, you bimboic excuse of a female ninja? I have better things to do with my time, believe it." Naruto replied loudly, she trying to pry the girl of her arm from where she had latched onto her. "Come on, it'll be fun," she exclaimed, "plus Sasuke'll be completely entranced by me if he sees me covered in water." She squealed to herself, just loud enough to be heard. Sasuke made another non-committal grunt, though Tazuna was sure he detected a hint of disgust in it. Whether Naruto wanted to jump in the puddle or not, which was most likely not, didn't not seem to bother Ino. She dragged the blonde girl towards the puddle at a run, and Naruto was forced into jumping into the puddle along with her. Muddy water splashed onto Ino's clothing. "Ew, mud, how am I supposed to look Y for Sasuke with mud all over me?" she shrieked. "It was your idea." Naruto snorted with laughter. Sasuke made another grunting noise. They had walked perhaps 10 meters from the puddle when for some reason Kakashi was mutilated by 2 creepy ninjas with a long spiky chain. One of the ninjas seemed to have an ugly bruise on his face. Naruto pulled out 3 shuriken and whirled them towards the 2 ninja. "Duck butt, I'm already on it," Sasuke yelled, hurling 3 kunai in the same direction. The shuriken and kunai jammed the chain into the trunk of a nearby tree, preventing use. Ino and Naruto used the distraction to creep up and whack the 2 on the back of the head with a certain amount of force before joining Sasuke in front of Tazuna. The ninja with the bruise on his face glared at Ino and Naruto. "You're next, you little bitches." The 3 genin surrounded a stunned Tazuna. Be that from the sudden change in attitude from the 3 trolls or from the creepy ninja was uncertain. Naruto joined her thumb to her nose and waggled her fingers patronizingly, whilst Ino pulled down her lower eyelid with one finger and blew a raspberry. Sasuke added his own You are pathetic, smirk. You should learn to hide your consciousnesses when you're dealing with Leaf Ninja. Ino yelled patronizingly. Some of us are mind readers, you know. Naruto and even Sasuke snorted with laughter at the faces of the mist ninja with the creepy claws. Not for long though, the creepy claws eye and two lunged towards them. Ino took place in front of Tazuna as Naruto and Sasuke lunged forward to meet the ninjas. Don't even think of taking one step in front of me, you old drunk. Ino ordered the stunned man, who dumbly nodded in reply. Meanwhile Naruto was busy with one of the clawed creeps. She used her small stature to her advantage. She didn't like it, but that didn't mean it didn't have its benefits, and dived through his legs, twisting upwards and ramming a kunai into his shoulder, just missing his neck. She used the momentum from the twist to propel herself over his shoulder, going full circle around him, before landing in front of him, flipping mid-air to meet him head-on. This was so easy. This was so slow she could practically see his next move. She lunged towards him again, flicking 3 shuriken towards him. He countered them with shuriken of his own, and she jumped upwards to avoid them. She came down almost on top of him bearing several kunai. He twisted at the last second, and Naruto believed he had dodged. Then she felt something gnawing and biting into her back. Naruto. A rush of air above her and an agonized glance upwards told her a clawed hand was swinging towards her. Sasuke saw Naruto collapse to her knees, and his thoughts of mercy towards the clawed creep ended as he saw the second hovering over Naruto, clawed arm raised. He rammed his kunai through the chest of the ninja he was currently fighting, before speeding towards Naruto. An exploding noise behind him told him the exploding tag had worked, but he was still too far away. Naruto! He yelled as the creep's claw was brought down in one swift motion towards the blonde girl. I think that enough of that, a familiar voice intoned. Sasuke stared at their teacher, who now stood between Naruto and the creepy ninja. The creepy ninja had a dazed look in his eyes and didn't seem to be focused. Next time you play dead, stay dead. Ino yelled angrily. What the hell were you thinking leaving these creeps to us, you dusty old scarecrow? I am neither old nor dusty, I'm 24. If you aren't old and you aren't dusty, then why is your scarecrow hair gray? Genetics, Ino, genetics. You lie. No one is born already gray. Can we stop the arguing and make sure Naruto isn't dying, maybe? Sasuke asked irately, finally reaching the blonde's side. You alright? He asked, not liking her abnormally pale complexion at all. She nodded, standing up. Sasuke could have sworn her eyes were red for a moment, but he dismissed it when her bandages unraveled. Shit, that bastard cut my wrappings up. She screeched, instantly zipping up the front of her jacket before anything could be seen. Sasuke wasn't sure whether he was supposed to be disappointed or relieved. He chose relieved considering there were so many other males around. Not that he was accusing them of anything, but he couldn't be too careful. Ah crud, my jacket's all torn up as we ouch. Naruto had tried looking over her shoulder at the medium-sized rip on the back, and succeeded in agitating her wound. It was a series of 4 short scratches from the clawed hand, and something at the edges seemed to be bubbling. Ugh, this really doesn't feel right, oi scarecrow. She looked up at the Jonin, swaying on the spot slightly. I think those things are poisoned. I feel kind of like visiting La La Land. Sit down and try not to move too much. It'll keep it from spreading till we can get some proper first aid. Kakashi gave Naruto a meaningful glance at the word proper. She seemed to understand what he meant. Sit down and let the Kyuubi heal it for the moment. Naruto wobbled a bit, and Sasuke immediately caught hold of her arm before she managed to trip over. He kept a hand on her upper arm, knowing full well she could not, and would not, place an arm around his neck for support. Ino hurried over to join them. Despite a few hiccups, you did well, trolls. Despite my apparent death, you were quick to react to a dangerous situation and protect the client. And you didn't let your enemy's superior skills get in the way of that. Naruto, Sasuke. You two did especially well, but you still have a lot to improve on. Naruto? He looked at the girl with a serious expression on his covered face, indicated by the no-nonsense tone in his voice. You used your height and flexibility to your advantage, but you need to think more about your personal defense and perception. You were injured because you didn't take your enemy's own experience and skill into as much thought as you should have. Naruto nodded, having already realized her mistake. Sasuke, you have much the same problem. You need to remember to finish fighting your opponent before you jump to help others. That other ninja substituted himself before your exploding kunai hit him, leaving you open from behind. Sasuke's eyes widened and he stared in the direction of where he thought he had left an at least knocked-out clawed creep. A charred smoking G-log lay where his inured ninja was supposed to be. The said ninja lay a few meters away from the log, sorting a shallow head injury. Sasuke presumed that was Kakashi's doing. Ino, you reacted quickly, and made your mission of higher importance than my death. You were the first to realize the danger too, though I'm not sure how you managed that. He raised an eyebrow, hoping for an explanation. You know about the Yamanaka telepathy, right? She asked. Kakashi nodded. Well, in Konoha I can communicate with any of my family members or anyone who is granted permission from the clan to sign some scroll. I can sense the consciousnesses of those who have trained with chakra to a lesser degree. I can't communicate with other ninja, but I can recognize their presence, their consciousnesses. I could feel two ninja in that puddle and I didn't think they were hiding there for the fun of being stamped on. She explained the alertly absently, focused on pulling a roll of spare bandages out of her pack and handing them Naruto. I see. That explains things. I never knew the telepathy extended so far though, he mused. He then turned to Tazuna, his lone eye glaring at the man. As for our client here, he should know that lying about the severity of a mission is dangerous not only to himself, but to the ninjas assigned to him. Mr. Tazuna, you lied about the severity of this mission. Because of that one of my students has received a serious injury. I'd appreciate it if you told me exactly what we're dealing with. Tazuna gulped. Father, you're back. The black-haired woman stopped as she took in the sight in front of her. Her father was carrying a small blonde girl, trying not to aggravate some half-healed wounds on her back and a newer-looking gash on her arm. She also had a nasty bruise on the side of her head, just creeping past the hairline of her right temple onto her forehead. An unconscious gray-haired man was being supported between another blonde girl and a boy with black hair. The boy seemed fine, but the girl had a slight limp and a bleeding bruise on her cheek. Sweet heaven, father, what on earth happened to them? She asked in a shocked tone, immediately taking the smaller of the two girls from him. She could tell the older man wasn't as severely injured, and besides, children came first. She summarized these kids were the ninja her father had requested for the journey back, but they couldn't possibly older than 12 or 13. Excuse us, but is there somewhere we can put the old scarecrow till he wakes up? He has chakra exhaustion and it'll take a while for him to wake up, the second blonde asked carefully. Of course dear. Father, show them where the spare room is while I take a look at her. Tazuna's daughter requested, hurrying towards one of the cupboards for the first aid kit. Sure Tsunami, this way, he replied, before leading the two ninja down one of the hallways towards the spare room. After a few moments the sound of thunderous footsteps echoed through the hall and the two ninja appeared back at the door to the living room. The boy in particular looked exceedingly breathless from the effort. He all but scrambled over to the couch where Tsunami was applying an antiseptic to the girl's arm, closely followed by his teammate. Is Naruto okay? I mean, well, besides the giant gashes and everything? The second blonde girl asked. Kneeling down next to Tsunami and fishing a roll of bandages out of the first aid pack that lay between them. I think so, it looks worse than it is. Are you two alright? Tsunami asked the blonde girl. She had a nasty-looking bruise on the side of her face that looked like it had not long since stopped bleeding. The boy was quiet, and stood staring at the girl on the sofa, so it was impossible to tell. I have a few bruises, and I pulled a fair number of muscles in my leg, but I can heal those up myself with some of the medic seals in the scarecrow's kunai pouch. Sasuke has a broken arm though, and his ribs aren't being very nice to him either, the girl trailed off. Sasuke's eyes snapped towards Ino when he realized what she had just said. He hadn't spoken a word, intending to take care of it himself, so how had she figured it out? Sasuke, I've known you since I was 6 years old. I may not know you as well as Naruto does, but I'm not blind. You favor your left side too much, and your arm has bruising all over it. And besides, I'm a Yamanaka. I can tell from your brainwaves. Unlike those creeps from yesterday, I know your consciousness very well, she stated. Had Sasuke not known of her clan's techniques, he would have asked if she was a mind reader. A broken arm? Tsunami shrieked in horror. It's only a small break, Sasuke argued. It didn't even break the ski, he was cut off as the woman all but manhandled him onto the sofa. A broken arm is nothing to be pushed to the side. And don't think I've forgotten about your ribs either. Sasuke glared at Ino, who snickered at him in an "it's your own fault for being an idiot" manner. Look out for the sword, Ino. Naruto squeaked in a panicked voice, rising from her futon to a sitting position. It took several moments for the pain in her arm and her forehead to reach her, and when it did she groaned from the sudden movement. She felt dizzy from the yelling now. Naruto, you're awake? Naruto flipped her head towards the futon next to her own to find Sasuke sitting up. He had bandages around his waist and his left arm was in a sling. Apparently she wasn't the only one who had been through the wars. What had happened while she was unconscious? If you want to call it that, everything looks blurry for some reason, she stated. It was so strange, everything had been so clear during the fight with Zabuza. Then Ino got hit and something weird happened to her vision. Everything had turned blobby, and she'd been so caught off guard that Zabuza had managed to creep up behind her and send her into obliviousness. Now everything looked like it normally did, but it felt weird. Like she needed glasses but wasn't wearing any, despite the fact she could see perfectly. It's probably because of that hit on the head from Zabuza, Sasuke rationalized. Naruto thanked the gods he hadn't asked why she'd frozen up like that. Honestly, how would she sound? I got freaked out because everything turned into blobs hardly sounded something a sane person would say, did it? The bandages on your back need changing, Sasuke stated warily, glancing at the patch of blood that had soaked through the strips of cloth to some extent. They had nearly healed, but the fight with Zabuza had reopened them again. He knew the gash on her arm would be gone by tomorrow too. Naruto gave him a suspicious look, and Sasuke felt his cheeks redden. He was thankful for the darkness. If Naruto had seen that, she would have made his life miserable. So they don't get infected before they heal, he hurriedly added, somehow managing to hide his stutter. Naruto softened the look of skepticism, but her next words were enough to send non-pleasurable shivers down his spine. Fine, but try anything else and I'll tell Mr. F. Eno and lazy butt. Sasuke tried and failed to suppress a shiver. Forget his father and Eno. Shikamaru would definitely murder his ass. Ever since the Ed lesson he'd been somewhat more tolerant of Naruto, not that he hadn't before, he just tended to actually stay awake more when she was around. He passed it off as truing to prevent her from doing anything too troublesome, but Sasuke knew better. Shikamaru had only put effort into one match in the academy, one with him. It had been after a very nasty argument with Naruto, though for all its severity, he couldn't remember for the life of him what it was about. One that had almost brought her to her second teary outbreak. Shikamaru had completely pummeled his ass into the dirt, going so far as to unveil a premature shadow possession technique. Sasuke had realized the boy was clearly a dark horse among the school rankings, and decided to tread with caution around him where Naruto was concerned. Shikamaru had never been a particularly good friend of his, that was Naruto's forte, and Sasuke didn't want to risk his wrath. Lazy he may be, but Shikamaru had inherited his mother's temper, even if he wasn't as easy to piss off as Yoshino Nara. Why, you can do the front, I'm just going to put the antiseptic on, he hastily reassured her. Sasuke briefly, though that was most likely going to be easier said than done. Even though it was dark, he could clearly make out the shape of her back as she grudgingly removed the current set of bandages. Her skin looked as pale as his own in the darkness, eerily so. He hadn't noticed so clearly before. Sasuke blamed his hormones, ignoring the niggling voice that told him Naruto was almost too similar to him in instances for it to be coincidence. He gulped as she handed him a strip of new bandage that she had already held over her front. This really wasn't going to be as easy as he had made it out to be, was it? TCH. Stupid hormones. Naruto stared at the blood belonging to the hermaphrodite Ishboy that glued itself to her hands like a second skin. She could feel it beginning to harden on her face. She could feel the stunned gazes of Sasuke and Ino on her back. She couldn't look at them, not after giving in to that monster. She had acted like some sort of rabid animal, like a mindless carnivore. Even worse, she had enjoyed the rush of inhuman instinct and power, even if she didn't like it, and Sasuke had seen her acting like that. There was no way they wouldn't find out about the Kyuubi now, not after what she had just done. Naruto wasn't sure whether it was the blood or the thought of her friend's possible reactions that made her throw up. She didn't really know what had happened either. One minuet she had been back-to-back with Sasuke, both of them getting the flow of the battle back to their side after finally seeing through the storm of needles. The next minuet, ice had been forming over both of them from the ground up. The Kyuubi seemed to have reacted instantly, blasting its sickly chakra trough her already battered skin and dissolving the ice as quickly as it came. It didn't work for Sasuke though, and the expression of terror she had seen on his face through the water freezing over his face had chilled her to the bone. She had never seen Sasuke truly terrified before, even against Zabuza he had been unnaturally calm. She knew that the expression had been generated from an inescapable death at the hands of the boy of questionable gender. She didn't remember anything after that but the smells, slimy, biting and tingling sensations that the Kyuubi chakra brought. The smell of fear and blood, the slime of Haku's organs against her fingers, and the gnaw of the Kyuubi chakra on her skin as it burned and healed her wounds. She was only vaguely aware of herself, and everything had passed in an amazingly clear yet instantaneous haze. Then she was away from the dome of ice, meters from Ino and Tazuna, the hands that held Haku's visible eaten into heart covered in blood and a warm taste in her mouth. The ice had instantly receded, and Sasuke had collapsed to the ground gasping for air. And then the hermaphrodite really had turned into a victim. What had she done? Someone's hand rubbed circled at her now healed back, and she felt the bile rise in her throat again. She didn't bother to try holding back and emptied her stomach onto the concrete. Specks of red flesh mocked her from the smelly mixture. "Feel any better?" Kakashi asked, moving to look her in the eye. "I didn't mean to, Kakashi-sensei. I swear I didn't. It just crept up on me when Sasuke got covered in that ice and everything was so hazy and then. I swear, I didn't mean to," she all but yelled, panicked terror and self-disgust flooding her voice. "I know Naruto, but you have to calm down, you're still channeling it." He placed his hands on her shoulders reassuringly. She stared at his mismatched eyes in confusion. "But I'm not using it. It's completely gone." Kakashi frowned and took a closer look at her eyes. They were red, but lacked the aura of maliciousness they had possessed not 10 minuets ago. He squinted at them with his Sharingan for a few moments before his blood chilled. A dual set of familiar triple swirls stared back at him. They lacked the aura that had earned their reputation from the recent events, but there was no mistaking those eyes. The Sharingan. Why did Naruto have the Sharingan? Naruto once supposed to have the Sharingan. Sasuke was supposed to have the Sharingan, as he now did. When Kakashi woke up that morning he hadn't really expected Sasuke to awaken his Sharingan, let alone Naruto. It was simply illogical. There was no way Naruto could be related to the Uchiha clan. Even as the denials entered his mind, Kakashi couldn't help but think of those rumors about his old teacher's supposed lover. Rumors about a woman with hair as striking but completely opposite to that of his red-headed wife. He had never believed them, believing them to be nothing more than the usual unfounded village gossip and that he knew his teacher better than anyone. He now felt himself wondering how well he had really known the man. He could see how no one would have noticed, if this whole fiasco had any credibility, a rampant Sharingan in the girl. She looked nothing like an Uchiha. She was the spitting image of Minato even if the village pointedly ignored that fact. Her face shape was obviously that of a girl's, but Kushina had possessed a similar structure. Similar, but oddly not that similar. It should have been obvious when her memory started improving that she had a different genealogy than what they had expected. If he really concentrated, he noticed she looked nothing like her mother at all. Kushina had raised the girl for several years before her death, further cementing Naruto's image as her daughter. Since this was the case, she had obviously known Minato had had an affair, so why had she never said anything? Maybe he should talk to the girl's sponsor. Wait a minuet here, wasn't her sponsor Fugaku Uchiha? Kakashi-sensei? Is it gone? He was jerked out of his musings by the sound of her voice. She appeared to be frowning in concentration, worry evident on her face as she did so. He summarized she was trying to suppress the now dormant Kyuubi chakra. He was almost vaguely aware of Sasuke and Ino dashing towards them after watching their exchange. Try cutting off all your chakra. You don't want the others to see your eyes, right? He hated lying, but until he got some answers himself he couldn't risk Sasuke or Ino finding out. This was complicated, and amongst other things Ino vehemently hated anything complicated. She would be more than a simple headache. He didn't even want to start with what could happen if Sasuke found out. More to the point, Even if her mother had been a Sharingan possessing Uchiha, she still shouldn't have the Sharingan. He was sure it was a predominantly patriarchal trait. In short, there was no logical reason for Naruto to have the Sharingan, never mind a fully advanced one. It was biologically impossible. He watched as Naruto's face paled and she instantly focused her concentration with all her effort on completely suppressing her chakra. The black swirls faded from her eyes and the red melted into blue. Her eyes were a bit different now, her pupils weren't nearly as prominent, and seemed to fade into her blue irises much like the pupil-less Hyuga and Uchiha eyes did. Ino and Sasuke were beside them only seconds after the black swirls completely disappeared. He knew Naruto was hiding something, if Kakashi's unusually jumpy demeanor around her and Ino's increased clinginess was anything to go by. He was aware of her attempts to broach the subject, but she never managed. That frustrated him. If she could trust Ino and Kakashi, couldn't she do the same with him? He knew her far better than the other two did. He should have been the first to know whatever it was she was hiding. Thunder crashed outside, and the accompaniment of lightning brightened the room. Sasuke was surprised to find Naruto was not in her futon as she should have been. The wind whipped through one of the open windows, the frame snapping against the wall loudly on its hinges. Not again, Sasuke thought to himself as he made his way around Ino's sleeping form towards the open window. Looking outside he could see a climbing plant of some sort leading up to the roof. Grimacing as the cold rain splattered against his body, he clambered out of the window, and up the climbing plant towards the roof. Naruto was seated on the roof, her soaked hair plastered against her face and whipped by the wind instead of in her usual pigtails. She seemed to be unaware of the fact that she was soaked to the bone, instead staring at the lightning in the distance crashing to the earth in fascination. "Why is it that every time there's a thunderstorm, you disappear?" he asked in an exasperated tone as he seated himself beside her. The tiles were digging into his skin through his soaked pajamas bottoms. It was freezing. He wondered how Naruto could stand the temperature in her thin vest and undershorts. He had forgotten his shirt, the house itself being too warm for it, and he suspected the vest wasn't all that substantial. "I don't know. They just fascinate me." Ever since that first time on the bridge, she trailed off, presumably lost in the memory of her first thunderstorm, the worst one to hit Konoha in 11 years at the time. The previous one had been during the Kyuubi attack, and it had been much worse due to the beast's presence. The storm was some distance away from the Yet, so Sasuke decided to let her watch the storm for a while before dragging her back inside. He was interested in it himself. Konoha hadn't had such a large thunderstorm since the one when he had found her on the bridge, and the shapes the light made were truly fascinating providing you weren't on the receiving end of one. He remembered Naruto had been stewing over her adapting memory that time, and it occurred to him she was once again worrying over something. Her knees were pulled up to her chest, only her eyes peeing out from over them, and her bare feet were scrunched up, almost clawing into the tiles they were seated on. "What's wrong this time?" he asked bluntly. There was no beating around the bush with Naruto. "Nothing's wrong, Sasuke. I just felt like watching." "Liar. Since when do you use my name?" he countered easily. She stared at him and he was sure he heard her grumbling curses against herself when she broke his gaze. "Is this about that red chakra on the bridge?" he asked, deciding she was unlikely to give him any answers unless he pushed for them. Her head whipped round instantly, eyes widening in alarm. How do you know about that? You were frozen," she demanded over a crack of thunder. "I couldn't move but I could see enough," he stated in a reassuring voice. She seemed to have tensed up even more from his question, and he was left in no doubt that the source of her anxiety was the strange red chakra that had enveloped her during the fight with Haku, as he now appeared to be known as. "It's nothing. Just leave it alone, okay?" she grumbled irritably. Sasuke was taken aback by her sharp abruptness. She usually saved that sort of tone for the villagers when they glared at her more than was necessary. She had never even used it with Ino, and she avoided using it as much as she could when he was around. Whatever her problem was, it seemed to have her well and truly distraught if she was actually using it on him. "You suck at lying, you know it. You're acting like I'm one of those villagers, and you're shaking." "You do not shake. Tell me what the hell that red stuff was and why it has you so freaked out," he ordered in a voice much louder than his normal one, but still considerably low-key. She hesitated for a few moments, taken aback by his unusual composed ferocity, before launching into speech. She started off with the familiar opening to the story of the Kyuubi attack, and he was somewhat confused till she informed him the Kyuubi was very much alive and kicking. Then he began to piece things together even as she informed him of the true sequence of events, deliberately avoiding his gaze. He could easily guess what she was so upset about as she described the true reason for Mizuki's sudden retirement. He felt his anger boil as the nearby storm crashed and flashed in time with his anger. How could a girl with grades and intelligence equal to his own, almost, be such an idiot? He was knelt over her before she had known what hit her, and had her pinned to the tiles. He assumed his Sharingan had activated by the tingling sensation in his eyes and by her stunned expression. He noticed her eyes looked a bit different, but not enough to give it much thought. "Are you such an idiot that you're going to start believing those close-minded bigots?" he hissed at her, gaining a bewildered expression from the girl, before it turned to the determination he was so used to seeing, though it was traced with gratefulness. "Of course not, I just felt bad about Haku," she snorted defiantly, voice softening with the ice boy's name. The softness did not last long and was soon replaced by a familiar grin. "Are you going to let me up now, or are you trying to say something?" she asked. It was only then that he realized their close proximity, and he found himself unable to move. Whether this was because of the embarrassment or the fact he didn't actually want to move was not something he could readily define, and he was at a loss for what to do. He found himself staring at her eyes again, and noted the black of her pupils bleeding into her irises. Her irises were still bright blue, and were easily distinguishable. It was only upon a close inspection the change would be noticeable. He traced past one of her eyes with one hand, fingertips barely brushing her skin. The sensation was enough to make his breath hitch in the back of his throat for a few moments before he lost all sense of reasoning and slammed his mouth onto hers. Something told him this was a bad idea, but Sasuke had never been good at listening to advice, even when it was his own. He was surprised to find her kissing back, sitting up for better reach and fisting her hands into his hair. His hands found her waist awkwardly as he ran his tongue over her bottom lip with some trepidation. He had always found Kiba's jabber on how to kiss a girl properly to be of little interest back in the academy, but he was wishing he had paid attention. All he had to go on now was a couple of pages of Icha he and Naruto had managed to read over Kakashi's shoulder before he caught on and snapped the book shut. Some closet pervert he was. In any case, the squeaks emitting from the girl beneath him told him he wasn't doing too badly for his first voluntary attempt at kissing. He was so wrapped up in his concerns of doing things properly he failed to notice the manic gleam poking out of one of Naruto's half-parted eyes. She pushed herself up, pushing her tongue into his mouth without hesitation as she forced him into a sitting position. When he finally got back to the matter at hand, she had straddled him, and his hands were running over the skin of her lower back and stomach beneath that flimsy vest. He was itching to move the hand running over her stomach a tad higher, but the rational part of his mind had regained control, and was demanding he stop before he ruined a good thing. He was terrified he would bite her tongue or something equally disastrous. They parted breathlessly, each staring at the other in stunned amazement, releasing their hands from hair and clothing. "I have no idea what that was, but that was more fun than watching Ino drive Itachi up the wall," Naruto exclaimed less loudly than normal, presumably due to the slight lack of air moments before. Sasuke grunted in acknowledgement as he secretly patted himself on the back. "Hey Sasuke, what was that giant shuriken I turned into with the other one underneath it when we first fought Zabuza called?" Naruto asked, scratching the non-inky end of the calligraphy brush. Sasuke and Ino both dropped their chopsticks in shock. They were a few hours from the village, and had stopped to have something to eat. Naruto had taken up the job of writing up the main mission report, along with her personal one, as usual, but this was a definite first. Naruto had not forgotten a word of the most meaningless conversations in years, never mind ninja techniques. It was why they gave her the main report so often. "You can't remember? That's impossible. You remember everything," Ino objected loudly around a mouth full of rice. Sasuke dodged a few stray grains with a look of revulsion. "Say it, don't spray it," he reprimanded. Ino ignored him and continued to harass her friend. "How can you forget? You haven't forgotten anything since your memory leveled up," she protested. Naruto looked just as confused. "It's like I'm not using it right. I can envision it, but I can't for the life of me remember what it's called. It's like there's something blocking me from remembering it fully, she complained loudly. Despite her initial worries, she had come to rely on her improved memory more than she had originally thought. Sasuke was giving a curious gaze, and Kakashi knew he would have to say something to keep him from connecting too many dots. Not that he knew what those dots were, but there was no harm in being cautious. Especially when it came to Naruto. It's probably an after effect of using the Kyuubi's chakra. Using that much probably messed up your senses somewhat. I doubt it's anything to worry about, but I'll ask the Hokage for his opinion when I hand in the report. He explained quickly, but not too quickly to be noticeable. It wasn't even a lie. Naruto had been having some trouble with her aim and hearing since the incident on the bridge. For all he knew, it may have had an effect on her supposed Sharingan as well. Yeah, whatever, can someone answer the question for me? Naruto yelled, losing her patience. Sasuke took pity on her and seated himself next to her, peering at what she had already written. After a few glances he snorted with laughter, gaining a glance from one of Ino's ever-watchful eyes. Before you worry about the names of techniques, try getting the client's name right. It's Tazuna, not Tarawa. And those two Chunin didn't use poison gas. They used poison claws. You forgot getting your back getting clawed up, he stated. Naruto gave him a bug-eyed look before turning back to the scroll with a frantic expression. Her eyes scanned her untidy scrawl and she let out a cry of horror at the obvious mistakes she had unwittingly made. Holy crap, you're right. I guess Scarecrow was right on the mark, she exclaimed, tearing the end of parchment off of the scroll. She'd have to start all over again. Getting to that stage had taken almost an hour with all the details she'd had to put in, even if a lot of them were incorrect. You can look over my version, it might jog your memory, Sasuke stated, fishing through his backpack for his own scroll. Ino's jaw dropped at the rare example of niceness. Since when did Sasuke help anyone out voluntarily? Even with Naruto, he'd never offered his aid with such ease. It was usually someone else's suggestion. With Naruto he'd never done otherwise, but he'd always seemed slightly disgruntled. You had to really force him to help anyone else, especially if they didn't speak on a regular basis. He wasn't making a single complaint though. Ino's matchmaking senses were tingling, and they had never failed her yet. Without being noticed, she pushed out her chakra from her mind towards her two teammates, their heads bent close together as they went over the reports. Naruto's chakra was twitching wildly, as it did whenever she was particularly satisfied about something, but there was something else. Damn, she hated trying to read Naruto's chakra consciousness. It was always so difficult to read. She tried reading her friend's expression at the same time. Despite her improficiency in the art, she was blushing, but she had been doing that for a while now. Then she saw it. Naruto was holding her left head up to her neck, bent at the elbow that rested on her knee. Her thumbnail was scraping the one on her pinky. She was embarrassed, nervous about being so close to Sasuke. She didn't have to look at Sasuke to know that something had happened again, but when? Damn it! Why was she never present for all these developments? What was the point of setting them up if she didn't get to see the results? Itachi would be so disappointed at her inability to get decent blackmail on Sasuke. She had to find out what had happened. Sasuke, are you going to finish that? She asked, motioning towards his abandoned lunch with her chopsticks. No, it was a white rabbit, not a stoat. I swear, as soon as I find out how I'm going to murder that stinking deranged ball of fuzz myself. Teach him to mess with my brain. Naruto grumbled, crossing out yet another sentence. So you don't mind if I eat it? Ino asked innocently, still probing his chakra with her own. She sensed irritation, and what she could only describe as a male ego trying to prove something. So he didn't like her interrupting him and Naruto. But why? Go ahead. Kakashi and Ino both dropped their chopsticks. Sasuke never shared his food with anyone, not even Naruto had gained that right. Ino held a silent victory dance in her private consciousness. That and the sudden helpful phase was more than enough evidence to name and shame him, coupled with her chakra readings of course. Itachi was going to lap this up. Sasuke, was that hunter ninja a boy or a girl? Naruto of them had a definite answer for that question, much to the blonde girl's annoyance. Ino was so busy musing over the hunter ninja's gender, she almost didn't notice Naruto's use of Sasuke name instead of the usual duck butt head. Alright, what was with the nail scratching earlier? Ino asked bluntly as she followed Naruto into her apartment. Sasuke had gone on ahead to his own house, and Ino had decided to take the opportunity to bully Naruto into spilling the beans. Naruto froze mid-step and swore. "Crap, you saw that?" Her friend smirked at her, and Naruto grumbled some more curse words to herself. She knew about her nervous habits thanks to Ino, but controlling them was another thing entirely. She masked her chakra from Ino well enough, but her physical quirks still needed work before they could be considered Yamanaka-proof. "So, what happened to make you so twitchy?" Ino asked, flicking the switch on the kettle. Naruto rummaged through her wardrobe on the other side of the room for some clean clothes. The raggedy black shirt and orange shorts made an appearance. Ino suppressed the urge to object to this choice of clothing, and Naruto began to mumble something as she pulled her jacket over her head and kicked of her trousers. "I flawed, Krugi, MRAFE count. What? I can't hear you," Ino frowned, pouring some of the boiling water into waiting containers of dehydrated noodles. Naruto lost her patience with the jacket, and decided to unzip it like normal people. She pulled on the black shorts over her bandages and pulled a belt through her shorts before she moved to snatch the ramen from the countertop. Ino snatched it out of her way before she could lay her hands on it. "No way, not till you tell me what you just said," she smirked. "I hate you." Sure you do, so do you want the ramen or not?" Naruto grumbled a few well-chosen swears and insults before quietly going into her little adventure on the roof with Sasuke, keeping the description fairly muted, refusing to meet her friend's gaze. Ino squealed and jumped up and down and made a whole number of girlish noises Naruto wouldn't have made over her cold, dead body. I knew it, she yelled joyfully, all but jumping on the second blonde who was attempting to eat her lukewarm noodle dish. "If you mention one word of this to Itachi, I'll tell him it was you who stole his favorite t-shirt so you could try casting you on voodoo on it to make him chase you," she stated nonchalantly, trying to angle the noodles towards her mouth despite her friend's interference. Ino stared at her in horror. "But that was your idea," she objected, releasing her friend. "I know, but you didn't have to listen to me, did you?" she grinned, finally munching on the now cold noodles. "I hate you. Love you too, Ino." Itachi knew something had happened on his brother's first C-rank the minuet he walked through the door. He had a demeanor that could not be associated with the mission's disastrous success, as he was later to be told of. No, something more personal had occurred, and Itachi was itching to find out what it was. He had a few ideas, and assumed Sasuke's purple-obsessed teammate would have some form of information for him. At least, she would if Naruto didn't blackmail her first, going by their absence. Though it's safe to assume she had done just that. His father's wary gaze upon his youngest sibling during dinner told him he was not the only one who had noticed. Alarm bells blared through his mind when Sasuke relented the last of the rice balls to him instead of causing an argument equivalent to the Third Ninja War. "I'm assuming you know about it then?" he asked cryptically, picking the bones out of his fish. They desperately needed to look into getting a housekeeper. This inability to cook something edible was going from sublime to ridiculous. Do you mean the? Sasuke paused, frowning in concentration. Itachi mentally congratulated Sasuke on his caution concerning Naruto's fuzzy tenant. It wouldn't do for him to be revealing the subject openly. "Are you talking about the stinking deranged ball of fuzz?" Sasuke asked. Even their father managed to look alarmed by the description of the Kyuubi. Sasuke sensed their surprise and quickly ascertained his wording. "Her words, not mine." "And, how did you take this news?" their father asked seriously. "I hope you didn't do anything Ross." "No, it was fine. I mean, it's still Naruto, and Ino would have killed me so," he trailed off in embarrassment. It was the rambling that caught the attention of his two relatives. It was the bright red that stained his face before he launched into his drabble that alerted them. Itachi didn't know whether he should be happy his brother was finally making a move, or be worried about his father's unusually pale face. Sasuke did not seem to notice this and continued to give an edited account of the mission. He could only give a brief account due to the client confidentiality clause that encompassed all mission orders. Fugaku had been alarmed by the description of the wounds his ward had received on her back, but Sasuke had quickly reassured him they were nothing more than an irritating scratch now. "Oh, and Naruto completely messed up the mission report," he added nonchalantly. He was warily poking his chopsticks against gelatinous substance that was supposed to be a type of chilled soup. It wobbled, and it looked like Sasuke was seriously doubting the thing was fit for human consumption. Itachi swore to himself he would look into a housekeeper before the week had ended. It was a Sunday. I failed to see how, their father replied, stating his confusion. She forgot the names of the techniques, or mixed stuff up. She even got the name of the client wrong. It was so weird. She normally remembers everything as well as Itachi. He trailed off, clearly pondering the strange new turn of events. Did she have any idea as to why? Their father asked far too alarmingly cautiously for Itachi's comfort. Sasuke shook his head. She just said it was like something was blocking her from remembering completely, even though she had a vague idea of how things went. Kakashi said it was probably from using the Kyuubi's chakras so much. He trailed off once again. Itachi felt more alarm bells ringing. The memory situation was hauntingly reminiscent of the time Shisui had activated his Sharingan, and Sasuke was probably noting the same thing to a lesser extent. He had been young when it had happened, but he had been old enough for the situation to strike him as familiar. Itachi glanced a look at their father and felt his suspicions rising at the sight of his paling face, furrowed brow, and shock-parted lips. A loud knock at the door distracted them. "Sasuke, would you mind getting that?" Fugaku asked in his usual calm manner. Sasuke eagerly left the table, desperate to avoid the so-called meal as much as possible. Before his elder brother could confront their father about the sudden revelation, Sasuke returned with a familiar gray-haired man. "Kakashi senpai," Itachi greeted. "Yo, man lady." The man greeted cheerfully in reply. Itachi twitched at the mention of the stupid nickname Naruto used, which she thankfully appeared to be growing out of. Kakashi chuckled at his expression. "Get on with it, Scarecrow." Sasuke and Kakashi found their positions to be reversed. "Don't be so rude, Sasuke." "Hello, Kakashi." "What? Naruto and Ino get away with it." A glare from Fugaku silenced the younger of his two sons. "Not that this banter isn't amusing, but I came to speak with you about your blonde ward Mr. Uchiha," Kasha stated, directing his attention to Fugaku. "I assume this is about the incident with the Kyuubi during the recent mission?" he asked suspiciously. "That and another matter I believe needs to be brought to your attention," he stated. He seemed to communicate something to the eldest of the Uchihas through his gaze, but despite rapidly developing theories, Itachi had no clue as to what he could possibly be trying to say. Sasuke seemed utterly lost, to say the least. "I see, then let us continue this discussion in my office," he said after a long pause. "Itachi, I'll leave Sasuke's Sharingan training up to you for the time being," he instructed, getting up from his seat. Itachi noted this as one of the few moments he had desperately wanted to strangle his father, but he could hardly say no. Especially not when Sasuke looked so enthralled with the prospect. They had even less time to train together now that he too had graduated. He silently vowed to bully the information out of his father as he watched the man retreating to his study with his old Anbu senior. Kakashi and Fugaku did not emerge from the former's office until long after Naruto and Ino arrived. Itachi was being driven up the wall by his father's secrecy so much that he missed one of his targets, earning a wide-eyed look from the group of genin. The training eventually digressed into a game of Onigoko, which Ino prevailed at rather irritatingly. Even Itachi had a certain degree of trouble keeping away from the girl. Itachi made a mental note to thank the girl for the impromptu suggestion after one opportunity raised itself, however. He had hidden himself directly across from Naruto. The girl had spotted this and waved cheerfully. He had no idea what prompted him to do so, but he placed an illusion over his eyes as he activated his Sharingan and focused on the girl hiding in the tree branches on the other side of the clearing. The concentrated globs of chakra building up behind her eyes spoke volumes. Not only did Naruto have the Sharingan, but she had a fully evolved one. Several questions clicked into place regarding the girl's memory, but the new information raised a great many more as to why she had the bloodline in the first place. "Do you think he'll ever show up on time?" Naruto asked. They were waiting for the resident Scarecrow to show up for their usual mission. Ino was seated on the pavement, head leant against the railings as she caught up on lost sleep from the night before. Apparently she and her brother had been given a training session with Shikamaru and Choji. Naruto wondered what kind of training they'd been put through. While Ino didn't have anywhere near as much stamina as she did, she easily had enough to rival her two cousins. Naruto hadn't seen her friend this exhausted in a while. Several weeks had passed since the mission to Wave, and they had been taking D ranks again, much to their irritation, and were supposed to be taking a C rank today. Kakashi had been oddly wary about taking the higher ranked missions. Will there ever be a meal fit for human consumption in my house? Sasuke asked rhetorically. When Itachi finally gets around to hiring a housekeeper. He's been grumbling about it for weeks now, Naruto answered anyway. Sasuke glared. Naruto snickered before resuming a tense silence between them. Naruto, not that she would ever admit it, was confused. Before the little encounter on Tazuna's roof, she had been steadily growing aware of Sasuke. In particular, his attitude around her. He had been talking more, and had been easier to convince into doing things. He had been much more flustered than he should have been after the meddling of a certain pair. Oh yes. She knew that kiss at the dinner before their test had been Ino's and Itachi's doing. Strangely enough, she had found herself becoming much more aware of his presence. She had been so preoccupied with his changing attitude, she hadn't noticed herself being more and more interested in Sasuke as a whole. In short, she was discovering what his fangirls found so appealing. She hidden it well, though not well enough to avoid Ino's notice, but it had unnerved her. She was no sappy fangirl, thank you very much. Her inability to stand flower arrangement in any scenario other than helping out at the Yamanaka flower shop proved that, as well as her dislike of makeup, the disgusting frilly underwear the shop seemed insistent on selling, thank God for undershorts, and other such girly activities. It was safe to say any concept of romance had failed to reach her notice unless it came in the form of a porn book. She had looked through her substandard collection of smut for some sort of idea on how to proceed. Ino would never let her live it down if she asked for help, but had found the novels suitably unhelpful. That meant she was venturing into dreadfully uncharted waters. She had almost died from shock and eagerness of all the things, when Sasuke had brought up the need to change her bandages the first night they'd spent at Tazuna's house. Then had come their little makeout session on the roof. What was she supposed to do about that? Was there supposed to be this long, annoying, awkward lack of interaction between them? The porn books always had the heroine happily jumping on the man's the next day, or simply blushing when he hugged her. There was never such a lack of communication. Naruto assumed this meant Sasuke felt no concern over the matter, or was just as baffled as she was. She believed the former to be an incorrect hypothesis as he had pushed her out of the way of some falling scaffolding and broken his arm doing so a few D ranks back. So that left bafflement. Naruto found this much more likely seeing he interacted with very few people. Besides herself, Ino, Kakashi, and his family, the only people he had something of a relationship were the officials in charge of mission handouts and a strange paranoid rivalry with the other boys from their graduating class, particularly Shikamaru. He completely ignored everyone else. This allowed her to make a safe assumption that Sasuke had absolutely no clue as how to proceed. Naruto screamed curses behind her silent facade. Ino yawned, starching her arms, before falling back to sleep, leaving her two teammates to wait for their lazy teacher to show up in a frustrating stalemate. Fugaku stared at his wife's grave marker intently. He wished she was still here to tell him what he was supposed to do, but if she was still here he wouldn't be in this situation in the first place. Kakashi's report had confirmed what he had suspected for years, but ignored it every time things seemed as if they were to suddenly turn topsy-turvy. Well, now they were definitely topsy-turvy and he had no one to blame for his situation but himself. He should have made things clear from the beginning, but factors in play at the time had meant Naruto's lineage be hidden from everyone, even the Hokage. He had never expected the girl to awaken the Sharingan. Yes, her mother had carried the bloodline, but it was passed on through the male line. He had never prepared any sort of explanation for this scenario. He wasn't quite sure why he was in this scenario to begin with. He'd noticed the obvious signs of the cursed Uchiha eyes in the girl. The improvement in memory was a dead giveaway to he who knew whose DNA had formed her own. He'd had the gall to remain oblivious until Kakashi had carefully, yet bluntly asked why two, not one, of his pupils had manifested the swirling red irises. He'd had to tell Kakashi the whole truth then, despite his wishes to take the truth to his grave. After the man had left, after swearing to secrecy even from the Hokage, he'd taken the time to look for those telltale globs of thick chakra behind the irises. Only a Sharingan user could possess those bubbles of chakra, waiting for activation, and only another Uchiha could see them. It left him in no doubt as to her possession of the bloodline, and he wished he knew why. But more worrying than her inheritance was the rapidly progressing relationship his youngest son insisted on pursuing with her. That was another scenario that had not figured into his calculations. He had encouraged the friendship between them. Of course he would. They were closer than they were aware of, but not for it to become a romantic one. He supposed he could have just told the three of their exact relationship in the beginning, but the dogs of Iwa and Kumo had been sniffing around, far too interested in Naruto's resemblance to her father to allow her second DNA input to be considered, let alone identified. They had been taken care of quickly, and none but the Hokage had noticed their presence, and of course, the Third Lord was far more concerned they should discover her Jinchuriki status. In any case, revealing everything would have been far too risky, and he didn't particularly believe the villagers would react well to the news. Danzo alone would have a field day with the information. He could hear him talking of how useful a Sharingan-wielding Jinchuriki of Hokage descent could be to the village now. So he stayed silent as he was known to be, taking her on as his ward, a gesture of kindness to those who had known his closest friend, and a gesture of duty to the villagers. It had been perfect. He could keep a close eye on her, and she was given the opportunity to unwittingly get to know her family. And now, thanks to those infuriating biological tendencies known as hormones, it was falling around his ears faster than he could keep up with. He could not come out and directly forbid the two from pursuing a relationship. Unwanted questions would be raised. The best he could do was warn them of possible heartbreak and broken friendship. Well, Sasuke he could warn. Naruto wouldn't even let him start those sort of conversations, and try to keep Itachi, and his blonde cohort, from meddling when possible. Quite frankly, he had no idea what course of action he was supposed to take from now on. "I've turned things into a right and proper mess, haven't I, Makoto?" he asked the stone memorial in front of him. He received no reply from his wife, already 11 years gone. The sound of footsteps behind him diverted his attention to the priest. "It's good to see you again, Mr. Uchiha," he greeted, a smile on his prunish face. Fugaku greeted the man with an incline of his head. "As to you, Hoshi-sama, worries about your young ward again?" the wizened man asked. Fugaku gave the man a puzzled look. "I doubt you realize it, but every time something over Naruto concerns you, you come visiting your wife," he explained in his kind manner. Fugaku was shocked that the man had picked up on what he was stressing over, but even more concerned by the fact this seemed a regular occurrence. He scolded himself. The priest had always been very observant of the going-on amongst his shrines. There was no need to worry. "It's almost as if you seek her approval instead of guidance over the matters concerning that child," the old man continued, lighting an incense stick and clasping his wrinkled hands together in prayer. "Pardon?" Fugaku was stunned. He had known of the priest's observant nature, but he was beginning to wonder how much the ancient, hobbling, holy man could see. "An old mont's rambling, Mr. Uchiha. Think nothing of it," the man smiled. He finished his small prayer before hobbling away to do the same thing on, how ironically, Kushina's grave. Fugaku could think of nothing else as he walked the short route back to his home, his thoughts no clearer than when he arrived. Sasuke stomped through the streets of Konoha, scaring small academy students and civilians from his path. He had never been in as foul a mood as he had today. He had gone to the meeting point with every intention of confessing to Naruto properly and ending this stupid stalemate, only for Ino to arrive early. Ino had no place in overhearing him doing so un-Sasuke-ish as confessing to a not a girl. True, she had been sleeping for most of the time, but Ino has some sort of crazy matchmaker's radar that would have immediately woken her, and Ino was far at masking the state of her chakra, which would have fluctuated on waking, than he was at detecting it. So he had been forced to endure yet another awkward silence in Naruto's company. He would not delude himself into believing Naruto would have any clue as to how to proceed. Maybe she'd know they weren't supposed to be ignoring each other, but she wouldn't know how to fix that. Her experience with romance was worse than his own, only present in books of smut. Her few fanboys had been too scared of being castrated during confession they'd avoided it altogether, choosing to admire her from a distance. At least his fangirls had been brave enough to approach him, so he had some sort of idea of how confessions were supposed to go. Then again, he had never been the one to do the actual confessing before. Was it supposed to be so nerve-wracking? What has rejected him? He felt a brief, very brief, minuscule smidgen of pity for all the girls he'd bloodly to buzz off during his days at the academy. They had made it look easy, but he was beginning to admire their idiotic courage. Even worse, as soon as Kakashi had turned up, well past 4 hours late, to tell them they wouldn't be getting any missions for the rest of the week for their recent hard work, Naruto had darted off to God knows where faster than a criminal from a crime scene. As he contemplated all this, a warning of sorts from his father floated to the forefront of his thoughts. He had been surprised when his father had stopped him before heading to the team's usual meeting point. Just because Kakashi was late, his father saw no reason as to why he should adopt the same habit. This relationship of yours with Naruto. Tread carefully with it. If it doesn't turn out how you envision it to, you'll lose more than her friendship. Talk about being cryptic. If he had wanted to give him the break my daughter's heart and suffer painfully speech in place of her biological father, whoever he may be, he should have just said so. It would have been a whole lot easier to understand than his cryptic crap about losing in visions or whatever. He was walked past the entrance to the cemetery, feeling too out of sorts to visit his mother for once, but halted his steps when a loud familiar voice rang over the breeze. "Arg, your son is stupid, Mrs. Yu. Why can't he just talk to me and be done with it? He knows I don't get this sort of girly crap." Sasuke twitched once before turning on his heel and darting towards the cemetery entrance with full speed. Naruto had all but flickered away from the meeting point, such was her speed to get away. She was half along the street leading to the cemetery before she had realized what she was actually doing. What on earth was she thinking? She was supposed to be confronting the stupid, duck-ass-haired, idiotic, stubborn, brother complex D, pride-drenched. In any case, she was not supposed to be running away. Naruto Uzumaki did not run away. Ever. It was a completely foreign concept to her. Sasuke had been forced to intervene more than once when she had picked fights with that stupid white-eyed boy from the senior year in the academy because of this trait. So why was she running away like some frightened girl? Sasuke would probably snort and tell her because she was a girl. This thought only served to irritate her further. Her agitation and confusion found her in the cemetery. She had decided to visit her mother, hoping the act would do something towards clearing her jumbled thoughts, when another grave caught her sight, Makoto Uchiha. Her brain chose that moment to remind her that she had never properly introduced herself to Sasuke's mother. She simply lit an incense stick and wished her well in whatever she was doing in the afterlife or reincarnation or whatever dead people did after they died. For some reason, that sharply stung at her heartstrings. After obtaining permission from the priest, who had seemed unusually happily saddened by her request, she had hurried to light the incense, cursing herself for not bringing any sort of offering other than the leftover tomatoes from her lunch. Feeling a need to offer something as a form of apology, she fished them from her lunch pack and laid them on the small memorial before slapping her hands together in prayer. Naruto then found herself presented with the problem of what to actually say to this woman she had never met. Hi, crud, this is awkward. I'm Naruto Uzumaki, and I've been making random offerings and stuff even though I've never met you or anything with Sasuke for, well, since. I don't know, alright? I can't remember anymore. Stupid Kyuubi messing with my brain or whatever. I left tomatoes. And, single quote. Naruto frowned, trying to come up with something to make the year's late introduction less insulting. Naruto was ashamed for not doing so sooner. It was only polite to introduce to your best friend kind of person's mother, even if they were a marble sticky uppy pillar. Oh, for the love of? I don't even know why I'm talking to you. I don't even know what you look like. She wailed internally. It was true that she had never seen a proper photo of Sasuke's mother. She had seen the family photo in the living room, Itachi looking irritated by his 1-year-old brother tugging painfully on his ponytail from his mother's arms. The name Perma frown didn't even begin to cover Mr. Yu's gloomy expression. She appeared to be smiling, but the photo was blurred from Sasuke's animated tugging and Itachi's aggravated reaction. Making out the woman's exact features was somewhat difficult, and Naruto had never seen another picture of Makoto Uchiha. Itachi had told both she and Sasuke, when questioned, he too had been puzzled, that their father had been on the verge of suicide after their mother died. He had been devoted to her more so than he had been to the clan, which had been of a greater level than his loyalty to the Hokage at the time. He had removed most of the pictures so as to avoid triggering painful memories. She had never questioned it, but now that she was actually holding a one-way conversation with Sasuke's mother, she wished she knew what she looked like. Well, not that it matters, I guess. I just figured I'd actually introduce myself since I leave you weird food with Sasuke so often. Stupid idiot's still terrified of ghosts. I know he is. He won't set a foot inside without someone else. Stupid, scaredy, stubborn git. He's such a wimp sometimes. Who kisses someone like that and just ignores them afterwards? Who freaking does that? Why are guys such wimps? Stupid duck ass-haired stubborn, never mind. You're a woman, or were, whatever. You understand me, right? Makoto Uchiha remained silent. Naruto maintained a similar silence before grabbing hold of her blonde hair and yanking hard pigtails in frustration. Arg, your son is stupid, Mrs. Yu. Why can't he just talk to me and be done with it? He knows I don't get this sort of girly crap. She complained loudly, gaining a chuckle from the priest several rows over. I mean it, if he doesn't say something soon I'll explode. Icha is no use to me right now. I have no clue how to handle this, and I'd rather do something really not fun than ask the matchmaking piggy for help. That stupid scaredy. Finish that sentence, and I swear to God I really will hit you, a familiar voice threatened jokingly. Naruto shrieked and whirled round to find a breathless Sasuke standing behind her, hands on knees as he bent over, taking in deep gulps of air. Unfazed that he had more than likely overhear her one-sided conversation, she made an attempt at a normal greeting. You're out of breath. You slacking your training, duck butt? She snickered, earning a weary glare from Sasuke. Are you ever going to stop calling me that? I have a name, you know. Maybe, she replied vaguely. Depends if you're going to grow a backbone and tell me what the hell that make out was all about. Sasuke seemed to find this confusing, if the silence once again generating itself between them was anything to go by. Naruto finished the rest of her prayer in silence, ignoring Sasuke's curious gaze towards the tomatoes on his mother's headstone. She finished the prayer with a bow of her head, and turned to leave once again. She had pondered the idea of confronting herself, but the idea terrified far worse than her lodger ever could. Besides, he was the one who kissed her. Sure, she'd gone along with it and had some fun of her own, but he was the original instigator. It was, therefore, his responsibility to clear the air. Where are you going? He asked, startled, seemingly aware she was leaving. Got to tell the priest I'm all done before I head home, don't I? She replied in a blasé manner. Naruto couldn't help but wonder if she should just forget the whole thing. She would be amazed if he actually buried his pride and explained his actions for once. Usually she knew him well enough to accurately guess, but not this time. She and Sasuke were similar in many ways. They both liked tomatoes, they were both stubborn, neither of them had their mothers in their lives, both were romantically stunted, and neither liked to lose. The key difference was pride. Naruto may have had as much pride as he had, but she was willing to put it aside when the situation desperately counted for it. But this time was different. Besides being more than their usual challenges or arguments, she had a feeling getting involved with each other would cause problems further down the line. Naruto had never ignored her instincts before, except when it came to Sasuke. Something about him set them haywire, at first with familiarity, and now something crush-like had joined the mix, and her instincts were screaming at her that it was wrong. She had no idea why, but Sasuke's personality aside, this was one of her main reservations. Her instincts had not often let her down, and thus she paid attention to them. Except when it came to Sasuke. She would be more than willing to ignore them for that stupid scaredy Sasuke. If only he would grow a backbone and explain things to her. Oi idiot, wait, he yelled, his footsteps thudding and crunching on the gravel path as he sprinted to catch up with her. What? Naruto asked when he turned her around by the shoulder. Why are you avoiding me? He asked, voice lacking its usual cocky air. If Naruto had been what Sasuke considered a girl-like girl, she would have bowed down instantly, providing she had not fainted. But Naruto was not a girl-like girl, she was not a girl, and so she remained perplexed. Whether it was genuine or false was open to debate. I'm not. Yes you are. You run up to God knows where after the team meetings and you've barely spoken to me since the wave mission. Alright, so she probably was sort of avoiding him. Without the sort of, but it was his fault in the first place. We made out on a roof and you expect me to be acting normally? You know I don't understand the girly stuff like that. And what good are porn books for romance? Useless. Absolutely useless. She vented, finally having someone to vent this to without worry of probable blackmail. Plus she could actually get a reply. Sasuke's mother was probably a very nice lady, but she was kind of dead. That didn't work out so well for the advice-giving scenario. I had no idea what I was supposed to do, and like hell I was going to tell Ino, unless you wanted Itachi teasing you to hell and back, and you were going back to the caveman days with the grunting and ignoring yourself, mister. So tell me now, can you blame for freaking out just a tiny little bit? Sasuke stared wide-eyed at the shorter girl who was now taking several deep breaths of air. You could have asked Ayame, he ventured delicately, in a non-patronizing tone. She stared at him before grumbling what sounded like some of her more vibrant swear words to herself. The ramen girl would have been happy to offer advice, and gave it whether it was needed or not. Sasuke suspected he had Ino and Itachi to thank for that, since Ayame was always stating that he would be perfect for the blonde, and that had matchmaker it and all over it. He wasn't complaining, but honestly, did no one think they could work this out by themselves? Speaking of working things out, it's not, well, I don't talk to girls half the time, Naruto. And don't beat on me for the making out, you were straddling me, he retorted after some mumbling. Wait, he wasn't supposed to be trying to place the blame here, was he? That sounded wrong somehow. He was supposed to doing something confession-ish, wasn't he? He didn't talk to girls, but didn't they get mad when you yelled at them with this sort of stuff? He'd seen Kiba trying to ask Sakura on a date from one end of the park to the other, and things hadn't turned out so well. That punch had looked painful. Oh dear God, was he using Kiba as a dating role model? No, don't think about anything Kiba would do. That was just asking for trouble. Oh yeah, guess I forgot that part, Naruto noted by surprise. Then again, Naruto wasn't exactly a girl. Maybe the Kiba approach would work with her? No, he wouldn't risk it. Besides being too risky, he refused to have Kiba as a dating role model. Naruto he froze. Why were no words coming out of his mouth? There were supposed to be 2 more words to his sentence. Had awakening the Sharingan caused his brain to malfunction? He had a second cousin who'd blown their brain up activating it, too distant a relative for his brain to handle it. It was almost as if his body was trying to stop him. Stupid hypocrite body. Aren't your hormones causing this mess in the first place? Filthy hypocrite. Sasuke was vaguely aware he was gawping like a gawping fish, and Naruto was beginning to be slightly weirded out. That wasn't part of his plan. God, where were his fangirls when they may actually be useful for once? All he'd have to do was smirk and they'd gladly share notes. Stupid useless fangirls. I think, no, I do. Naruto was shuffling nervously as if stuck between a rock and a hard place. He was obviously worrying her with the gawping, but said gawping was likely scaring the creeps out of her. Screw it, he stated to himself. He took a step towards the blonde girl and, placing a hand behind the back of her head, pulled her lips towards his own with a fair amount of enthusiasm. He made no further moves to deepen it. This was supposed to be a translation of Sasuke's stunted social ability into the more commonly used, I like you, please go out with me. He released her and did his best to give a pointed look that asked for an answer. Naruto seemed somewhat dazed for a few moments, but the haze was soon shaken from her mind when she slapped her hands to her flaming cheeks. If you even dare to go soft on me during training, I will kick your ass to Kumogakure and back, she stated pointedly. Sasuke took this as a yes and snorted, as if to say, what kind of idiot do you take me for? Kiba? Before taking her hand and leading her from the cemetery at a brisk pace. Oi, Sasuke, where are we going? She asked as she was dragged into the main streets of Konoha. Ichiraku's, he stated. Really? Score. Itachi twitched as he watched the exchange between his brother and Naruto from the privacy of the main shrine. He could hear the old priest chuckling to himself, but Ino seemed just as frustrated as he. Itachi, you need to have serious word with Sasuke on how to confess to a girl. She hissed. It appears that way, doesn't it? But you know what this means, right? Itachi gave the blonde girl crouched down beside him a perplexed look. It means awesome blackmail. As the two talked between themselves as to how they could bribe and blackmail their best friend and brother respectively, an old wrinkled man gave the two youngsters, as long as he was around, almost everyone would be a youngster, a small sad smile as they left for the main hub of the village. The old priest had seen many things in his time as the shrine's trusted custodian. It was a respected position in the village that had its own privileges if you could take time enough to look for them. and that young girl was no exception to his observations. She was an easygoing child, and far more trusting than he would have expected of one shunned so much by the ones her father, he had watched firsthand, had sacrificed his life and hers for their protection. It had been in the shrine, the ritual. It was thanks to this first-hand experience that he knew of the knotted web the man's energetic daughter was entangling herself in. He hoped that when the web began to untangle itself, she and boy she was so drawn to would withstand the tribulations that awaited them. The truth can be painful when it is an unwanted one. Then again, she may already know the truth, he voiced to himself quietly, gazing across to grave that had just been visited, incense still smoking. He showed no surprise as he turned to the eyes of the boy half conversing with the pale blonde Yamanaka, and smiled reassuringly. "What do you think?" he asked the dark-haired boy quietly as he passed him by to start his rounds. Then again she may already know the truth, the old man mumbled to himself. Itachi watched the old monk's gaze as it drifted from his mother's memorial to his own presence. "What do you think?" the man breathed as he passed Itachi by and plodded down the steps of the shrine. Itachi remained confused by his words for a few moments before several things rapidly clicked into place. That night, Sasuke did not return until the hours had ticked beyond 10 o'clock, a rarity for the boy. When questioned, he maintained the smirk on his face and closed lips before retreating to his bedroom. After going over the priest's words, Itachi had found several things beginning to make a lot more sense. The reason for his father's original sponsorship of Naruto, his familial-like fondness for the girl, his insistence on he and Sasuke getting along with the girl, and most recently his reaction towards Naruto and Sasuke's budding relationship. Though Itachi guessed that, if Sasuke's smirk was anything to go by, it had passed the opening stages fairly quickly. It explained the problems she was having with her memory and how she had come to have the Sharingan at a stretch too. Itachi still wasn't sure how that had been passed on. The Sharingan was not a matriarchal trait, but he would be damned if he didn't find out. This still did not erase the shock and horror of his realization. Not only did he have a younger sister, but he had unwittingly set the unsuspecting girl up into a relationship with his younger brother. Wouldn't that be a story to tell his grandkids? While it was true that Naruto was not his full-blooded sibling, she clearly had a different father. The relation through the maternal side made the familial relationship seem that much stronger. Itachi couldn't help but wonder if the feeling of hopelessness as to how to handle this situation he aided in causing was how his father felt at this moment. He considered going straight top the two of them and informing them they were unsuspicious, engaging in what most would refer to as incest, and then completely abandoned the idea. Not only would Sasuke be likely to leave the family for being lied to, but Naruto would not be able to handle the information all at once. Going from having no family and what had the makings of a stable relationship to having a family, but also having said relationship with a member of said family would be too much even for Naruto. It would be seen as the worst of betrayals. And somehow Itachi had the suspicion that, after a lot of consideration on their part, neither of his younger siblings would give two flying fucks. All this being said, Itachi decided it would be best to have a conversation with his father. Going by Naruto's age, their mother had been alive till around the girl's second birthday, putting Sasuke at age 3, and himself at age 8. Itachi, in all his genius, had failed to come with a plausible reason for their parents to seemingly abandon the girl when they were perfectly capable of raising her. And more to the point, where had the relationship with his parents gone so wrong that his mother would have sought another? He had always been under the impression that they had been madly in love. Itachi was beginning to wonder just how many skeletons his father had hidden in his overly large closet. "You think, just once, we'd learn our lesson and not bother to turn up on time," Naruto complained, yawning as she leaned her head on Sasuke's shoulder, falling asleep almost instantly. The boy said nothing, too dazed to reply. Like the rest of his team, Sasuke was not a morning person. Ino, who had seated herself beside a nearby tree, appeared to be sleeping, but the aura of hell that radiated from her told Sasuke otherwise. She was likely plotting Kakashi's downfall for waking them at such a young hour. After 3 more hours of waiting, their teacher finally made an appearance. "Sorry I'm late, I was discussing something with Mr. Uchiha," Kakashi stated, once the swirl of leaves had disappeared. "Liar," Ino yelled, giving the man her best glare. Sasuke gave him a suspicious look from the corner of his own glare. For all his father's own dislike of the mornings, he and Kakashi had been talking a lot lately. It was entirely possible he was telling a half-truth at least. Naruto continued to drool on his shoulder, mumbling something that sounded suspiciously like a certain book she had as yet failed to acquire. "Oi, Naruto, wake up," Sasuke poked her shoulder a few times. When this failed, he whispered something in her ear neither Ino nor Kakashi could hear, and received an instantaneous effect. "No, I can't wait that long. I want it now," she wailed, before looking around and noticing the presence of their team leader. "Oops, sorry, your own fault for taking so long though, Scarecrow." She grinned. "What did you tell her?" Ino asked Sasuke in a hushed voice. "I told her that the rating on Icha was going up from 18 to 21, he replied in an equally quiet voice. Ino gave him a horrified look. "Don't say stuff like that, Sasuke, you'll jinx it," she hissed in a panicked tone. Sasuke said nothing but couldn't help but sympathize. It would be something to complain about, he decided after some thought. After a few more telling offs from his trolls, Kakashi finally got to the original reason for the team meetings. "I've signed you up for the Chunin exams," he stated, smiling through his mask. There was a very long silence before Naruto exploded with rage. "You have us wake up at 5 a.m. and that's all you have to tell us? Ino, you know what this means, don't you?" "Oh, don't worry. I have a very good idea, Naruto." "Sasuke, you have enough chakra for a fireball? Just get on with it." Kakashi gulped as his students threw their best combination technique in his direction. "If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I'd have you admitted to the permanent residency ward in the hospital for bloodline insanity," Itachi stated. His father sighed but made no other indication of complaint. He seemed to realize firsthand just how far-fetched his explanation had been. Itachi was beginning to wonder if maybe he wasn't suffering from bloodline insanity. This was all so absurd that it would be a much more realistic explanation than the one his father had just given him. "One thing I don't understand is how Naruto has the Sharingan in the first place," Itachi stated, after a long silence. His father's frown furrowed further. "I've been trying to figure that out myself," he grumbled. "I have several theories, but they are even more far-fetched than the explanation I've just given you." Itachi wondered if that was possible but kept his opinions to himself. "Have you thought of an explanation for when Naruto finally realizes she has our bloodline?" he asked instead. It was an obvious problem that was bound to occur at some point in some form or another after all. In fact, several of the unwanted scenarios his father had unwittingly tangled them in were bound to occur. It was just a matter of which ones were to transpire and when. His father's uncomfortable silence told him the answer to that question. "I can't believe that stupid old Jonin." Ino raged as her teammates devoured bowl after bowl of ramen. "Let it go already, at least he gave us an excuse that was somewhat believable for once," Sasuke said soothingly in between mouthfuls of noodles. He was determined not to be outdone by the blonde girl sitting between him and the paler-haired girl. That was something easier said than done, however. Ino huffed angrily as she viciously poked at her own noodles with her chopsticks, splashing the broth over the edges of the bowl. "Still, the Chunin exams sound like fun. Chunins have the same age restrictions as regular 18-year-olds, so if we pass." Naruto trailed off, an eager grin forming across her scarred face. Ino seemed to pick up her trail of thought, and squealed loudly. "If we pass, we can buy Icha Paradise without worrying about the age restrictions." "I take it back, that Scarecrow is the best teacher ever." She bounced up and down on her stool gleefully. Whilst secretly relishing the idea, Sasuke was unsure that she should be bouncing around so much. His worries were proven to be well-founded when Ino's actions sent the wobbly countertop crashing towards the floor. The countertop was easily dodged by the three customers, but the ramen bowls were not. One was sent crashing onto Naruto's face, still filled with the steaming soup. There was a howl of pain from the girl and she pulled the bowl from her face, yelling for a washcloth. One was quickly handed by Ayame, who was scolding her father for not fixing the countertop earlier. Naruto all but snatched the cold wet rag from Sasuke's hands and scrubbed her face with such ferocity Sasuke worried she could pull her skin off with the action. The soupy mixture was soon removed, but Naruto was still furiously scrubbing her eyes with the cloth. "Did it get in your eyes?" Ino asked in a suitably concerned voice. It had been predominantly her fault after all. Naruto seemed not to hear her, and instead continued rubbing the cloth over her eyelids intensely. Seeing the raw scrubbed skin from her efforts, Sasuke snatched the cloth from her hands. Had he not grabbed her hands, he was sure she would have attacked with her fingernails instead. "Naruto, what the hell are you trying to do, claw your eyes out?" he asked, slightly irritated by her rashness. "I can't help it," she groaned, trying to wrench her wrists from his grasp, unsuccessfully. "It feels like they're burning from the inside out," she hissed, face further contorting. Those words struck a sickly familiar chord within him, reminding him of his own musings years before. If Sasuke didn't know better, he'd say she was prematurely developing the Sharingan. He remembered Itachi being on the verge of gouging his eyes out when he went through the process. He didn't believe it for an instant, but so many things would click into place if it were true. But if it was true, then, deciding to go out on a limb, he spoke 4 words that would alter his morals permanently. "Naruto, oh, open your eyes." Naruto's face remained scrunched from the pain for a few moments before her eyelids were raised with considerable effort. He briefly heard Ino breathing something along the lines of, "Holy shit," as he stared at a pair of hauntingly familiar black and red swirls. Sasuke wondered if his current emotions were a good example of the phrase, "the rug being ripped from under your feet." "It stopped, the burning's gone," Naruto stated in shock. She became aware of her best friend and boyfriend-like person staring at her in equal amounts of shock. Ino was gawping like a fish for some reason, and Sasuke. She didn't really know which emotional category she was supposed to place that expression in. He didn't look angry at her, but, "Why are you staring at me like I have broccoli sprouting out of my ears?" she asked in confusion. Sasuke said nothing as he untied his Hite-8 protector from around his head, and handed it to her with a shaking hand. She gave him another look of perplexity. "Take a look," he instructed, shock still evident on his face. Naruto raised an eyebrow, but raised the shiny metal rectangle to her eye level. She stared at the spinning black commas and red irises for several moments before adding her own comment. "Well, that's a new one," she stated. The Hite-8 in her hand fell to the ground as her new eyes rolled back in her head and she fell to the ground with a resounding thud.